Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Green People of West Virginia. I've always found solace in the wilderness. The hum of the city, with its constant noise and movement, never suited me. So, when I decided to take a break from my routine and head to the forests of West Virginia, it felt like a perfect escape. No plans, no obligations, just me, the trees, and the open trail. I needed to clear my mind to reconnect with something simple. As I drove deeper into the mountains, I noticed how the landscape shifted. The highway narrowed, winding its way through dense forests, the trees pressing closer together like old friends. The air, thick with the earthy scent of pine, seemed to calm my racing thoughts. I pulled off the road at a small parking lot near the edge of a popular hiking trail. A few cars were parked, but it didn't seem crowded. I grabbed my backpack, checked my gear, water, snacks, a map, and began my trek. The sky above was a soft gray, a few clouds hanging low. The temperature was cool, the kind of crisp air that makes you feel alive with every breath. As I walked deeper into the woods, the sound of my boots crunching on the dry leaves was the only noise that reached my ears. It was perfect. I had no particular destination in mind, just the desire to get lost in the quiet, to forget about work, the constant stream of emails, and the noise of the outside world. The path was well trodden, a familiar route for many hikers, but it felt new to me, each bend in the trail offering something different. Birds called to one another in the distance, and the wind whispered through the trees, making them sway and creak. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was as if the woods were alive in a way I hadn't expected. At first, it was nothing more than a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. But the deeper I ventured, the more it grew, a quiet tension that hung in the air. I paused for a moment, standing in the middle of the trail. The sound of my own breath, steady and calm, filled my ears. But something was wrong. It was too quiet now. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, the wind, the rustling of leaves, had all faded. In their place, there was an eerie stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. It's just a forest, I thought. You're imagining things. I took a few more steps, telling myself it was just the isolation. Maybe I was just tired or too far from civilization. I walked a little faster now, hoping to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The trail wound deeper into the woods, but I kept my focus on the path ahead. And then, I saw it. A faint, glowing light flickered ahead of me, like a distant firefly. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection of the last rays of the setting sun. But this was different, green, soft, and persistent. It hovered in the distance, pulsing gently as if it were alive. I couldn't help myself. I felt drawn to it. Every fiber of my being told me to go toward it. It wasn't a normal glow. It wasn't natural. But I couldn't turn away. I took a step, then another, my heart pounding louder in my chest. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, illuminating the trees around me. The shadows shifted in strange ways, the forest seemingly changing as I approached the source of the glow. I reached the edge of a small clearing. the light was no longer just a distant flicker. It was here, right in front of me. And that's when I saw them. Standing motionless in the center of the clearing were figures, tall, humanoid shapes that glowed with the same eerie green light. Their forms shimmered, almost translucent, like reflections on the surface of water. But they were not reflections. They were real, standing perfectly still, their gazes fixed on me. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around and leave, but I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were planted into the ground, and all I could do was watch them. The figures didn't move, didn't speak. They simply stared. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity, and in that moment, the forest felt impossibly still, as if it were holding its breath along with me. Something deep within me told me to turn back, to leave. But another part, something darker, something I couldn't name, made me take a step closer. And then, everything went quiet. So quiet that I could hear the thud of my own heartbeat. I continued on the path, my legs carrying me deeper into the forest. The green glow from the clearing still lingered in my mind, but I tried to shake it off. I'd read stories about strange lights in the woods before. People often misinterpret natural phenomena, or maybe it was just the fading light playing tricks on me. It had to be that. Nothing more. I glanced up at the trees above me, their towering branches swaying gently in the breeze. The soft rustling of leaves should have been calming, but now it only added to the strange feeling stirring in my chest. The air around me felt thicker somehow, almost as though the forest itself were closing in, pressing in from all sides. The world beyond the trees seemed distant, almost unreachable. I paused, taking in the sounds of the forest. The usual chorus of birds was absent now, replaced by an unsettling quiet. I could hear the faintest murmur of the wind, but it wasn't the natural breeze I was used to. This wind had a sort of intent to it. It moved in swirls, brushing against my skin with a coolness that sent a shiver up my spine. "Get a grip," I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. The forest had a reputation for being a little eerie, but that didn't mean there was anything to fear. I glanced around the woods, noting how the trees, although familiar, seemed to grow closer together, their trunks curving in unnatural ways. It was as though the forest was rearranging itself, shifting in subtle but noticeable ways. I told myself it was just the way the light played off the bark, the shadows twisting as the sun began to dip lower. But there was something off. The quiet had turned oppressive. Even the trail beneath my boots seemed to be shifting, as if the path I had been following was becoming less defined, less sure. I looked down at my feet, unsure for a moment whether I was still on the marked trail. The ground was soft and uneven, but I kept moving forward, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the temperature seemed to drop suddenly. A chill crawled up my spine, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter around me, even though the air wasn't cold enough to warrant it. The trees around me loomed taller now, their thick trunks casting long, dark shadows across the trail. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The sensation of eyes on the back of my neck made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Every few steps, I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing just out of view, hidden in the trees. But when I looked, there was nothing, just the same eerie stillness. I picked up my pace, telling myself I was being ridiculous. "It's just the isolation," I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You're not used to being out here alone. It's just your mind playing tricks." I tried to focus on the beauty of the forest, the towering pines, the occasional flash of a red squirrel darting through the underbrush, but the sense of unease lingered, clouding everything around me. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. A distant rustle from the trees to my left caught my attention. I froze, listening carefully. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, so faint, so soft, that I could have imagined it. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound, but the forest was still again. It's nothing, I told myself. Probably just an animal. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I resumed walking, trying to shake off the discomfort settling in my stomach. As I moved further along the path, I noticed the trail curving sharply ahead, disappearing around a bend. My steps quickened, eager to reach the end of the curve and to find some sign of normalcy. Yet, just as I rounded the bend, I stopped dead in my tracks. A faint greenish light flickered again in the distance, just at the edge of the trail. It was much weaker than before, like a distant lantern swaying in the breeze. For a moment, I hesitated. My heart began to pound in my chest. That same pull, that same strange compulsion, tugged at my mind. I told myself to turn around, to head back to the car and forget about all of this. But the light, it was calling me. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I found myself stepping forward, drawn once again toward the source of the glow. The discomfort in my stomach deepened. Something wasn't right. But I didn't listen to it. I kept moving forward. I couldn't help myself. As I moved closer, the forest around me seemed to change. The path, which had been wide and clear moments before, now narrowed, twisting unnaturally between dense clusters of trees. The trees themselves seemed to shift, their branches stretching outward, almost as if they were trying to block my way. The deeper I ventured, the thicker the forest grew, as though the very air was becoming heavier, suffused with an unnatural energy. And then, I saw it again. The green light. At first, it had been a faint flicker, something barely perceptible at the edge of my vision, but now it burned bright, a glowing orb of eerie green radiance that hovered just beyond the trees. It pulsed softly, like the beat of a distant heart, the color shimmering and shifting with a strange rhythm. It was so vivid, so out of place against the dark shadows of the forest, that it felt as though the light itself had no business being here. The light didn't just glow, it moved, as if it were beckoning, shifting in the space between the trees. It floated effortlessly, suspended in midair, drawing me in. I couldn't look away. Something about it was magnetic, hypnotic. My feet carried me toward it before my mind had fully processed what was happening. I couldn't remember deciding to move, yet there I was, stepping forward, my body moving on its own accord, like a puppet responding to an unseen master. I tried to stop, to fight the pull of the light, but I couldn't. My legs felt stiff, each step heavier than the last, as if the forest itself were growing thicker, pulling me deeper into its heart. The light grew brighter as I neared it, and now I could see that it wasn't just one single source. It was a cluster of lights, each flickering like a firefly, hovering just above the ground. The glow illuminated the underbrush, casting strange shadows on the trees, distorting the shapes of the branches into twisted, grotesque forms. The air around the light seemed warmer, almost unnaturally so, and I could feel a slight tingling sensation on my skin, as if the very air was charged with static. I stood still for a moment, watching. The lights flickered and danced, weaving in and out of sight, teasing me with their movement. It was mesmerizing. The sound of my breath became shallow, my heart beat loud in my ears, yet I could not tear my gaze away from the lights. They were so beautiful, so otherworldly. What is this? I thought, My mind struggled to make sense of it, to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it's just some kind of bioluminescent fungus or insects. Maybe there's a scientific explanation for this. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it was a lie. There was something too deliberate about the way the lights moved. They weren't natural. They didn't belong here. And still, I couldn't bring myself to step away. The whispering wind began to stir again, louder now, rustling the leaves in the trees and making the ground beneath my boots shift. I glanced around, but the forest seemed to disappear around me. All I could see, all I could focus on, was the green light. It filled my vision, overwhelming everything else. I tried to call out, to ask if anyone else was nearby, but my voice came out in a strangled whisper, barely audible over the soft hum that now surrounded me. The more I looked at the light, the more I felt like I was slipping into it, as though it were pulling me towards some deeper, darker part of the forest, some place I didn't understand. And then, as if sensing my thoughts, the lights stopped moving. They grew still, and the soft glow brightened just a touch. For the first time since I'd noticed them, I felt a moment of clarity, a sharpness in my mind that told me this wasn't something I should be near. It wasn't right. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to leave, but my body didn't respond. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the green glow. My breath quickened as I felt a pull deeper than before, an almost physical force tugging at my chest. A voice, soft and barely perceptible, whispered through the air. It was faint at first, like the wind carrying a distant murmur, but it grew louder, clearer. It wasn't a sound I could hear with my ears. It was something in my mind, something that resonated deep inside me. Stay with us. I flinched, startled by the thought. My heart raced, and I tried to shake it off, but the voice persisted, quiet and persuasive, like a thread pulling at my consciousness. Come closer. My body moved again, involuntarily, toward the light. Each step felt slower, heavier, as though the very earth beneath my feet was reluctant to let me go. I wanted to resist, to turn and run, but every part of me was drawn in. And then, just before I reached the center of the clearing, I saw them, figures, standing in the flickering green light, their shapes hazy and shifting like silhouettes in a dream. There was no mistaking it now. I wasn't alone. I stopped dead in my tracks. The light, which had once been a soft, distant glow, was now brighter, blinding, almost, and as I entered the clearing, I saw them. Figures. Tall, slender, and faintly glowing. Their forms shimmered in the green light, like reflections on the surface of water, but they weren't reflections. They were there. Real. Yet somehow, not entirely so. It was as if the light itself had taken shape, had given form to something otherworldly. They stood in the center of the clearing, completely motionless, like statues carved from light itself. Their features were obscured by the brightness that emanated from them, but I could tell they were humanoid, tall, almost unnaturally so, with arms that hung by their sides, perfectly still. The shape of their bodies was vaguely human, but they were distorted, too, as though their limbs were elongated in strange proportions. Their faces were impossible to make out, masked by the glowing aura that surrounded them. But there was something about the way they stood that made me feel watched. Not in the way a person would watch another, but in a deeper, more invasive way. It was as though every part of me was being scrutinized, examined, by eyes I couldn't see but knew were there. A chill swept over me, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Despite their stillness, despite the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't frozen in place like statues. No. They were aware of my presence, aware of my every movement. I wanted to turn and run. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, but my body refused to obey. My feet were planted to the ground, my legs heavy and uncooperative, as if the forest itself was holding me there, preventing my escape. The light from the figures bathed everything in a strange, sickly hue. The shadows cast by the trees seemed to twist unnaturally, stretching out like fingers reaching for me. I tried to speak, but my voice was swallowed by the dense silence, a silence so thick that it felt as though the air itself had been sucked from my lungs. I couldn't hear anything, no wind, no rustling leaves, not even my own breath. Only the thudding of my heart in my chest, and that low, persistent hum that filled the space between us. I stepped forward, my body moving on its own, compelled by some unseen force. My mind screamed for me to stop, to run, to turn around and leave. But I couldn't. My legs carried me closer, slow and deliberate, as if I were being drawn into their presence. The figures never moved. They didn't speak. They didn't even seem to acknowledge me. They just stood there, motionless, watching, waiting. The glow around them pulsed, rhythmic and steady, but it wasn't the light that captivated me, it was their stillness. How unnaturally still they were, and yet, how alive they felt. I reached out a trembling hand, as if to touch one of them, to make some kind of contact. The air around them seemed to ripple, but the figures didn't react. It was as though they were beyond my touch, beyond my comprehension. A distant part of my mind, the part that still clung to reason, tried to convince me that this was all some trick of the eyes, some illusion caused by exhaustion or the strange, otherworldly glow. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe it was the isolation, the eerie quiet of the forest playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a hallucination. I could feel them, feel their presence, the weight of it pressing down on me. It wasn't just the strange glow, or their unblinking, silent watch over me. It was something more. Something that made every part of my being scream in terror, yet also, paradoxically, draw me closer. Their faces, or what I could make out of them, were impossibly blurred, like smears of light, but there was no mistaking the emotion they conveyed. An emotion I couldn't name. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But their presence suffocated me. Every breath felt heavier. The air was thick, as though the very space around me was closing in, pushing down on my chest. I could barely breathe. I could barely think. I tried to speak again, my mouth dry, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Who? What are you?" No answer. Of course, there was no answer. They didn't need to speak. Their silence was enough. I could feel it, like 1,000 eyes, staring deep into me, into my very soul, dissecting me, judging me. The air crackled with static, and for a split second, I thought I saw one of the figures move. Just a twitch of its arm, a slight shift in its posture. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back. But no! They were still. Completely still. Like statues, locked in place by some force I couldn't understand. I was trapped. The realization hit me suddenly, like a cold wave crashing over me. I wasn't just lost in the forest. I was lost in something far worse, something that didn't belong to this world. Something ancient. Something that could make me forget everything I knew. Forget who I was. Forget why I was here. A deep, low sound rumbled through the air. It wasn't a voice, but it sounded like a voice. It echoed through my mind, reverberating in the very core of my being. Stay. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat as the figures remained perfectly still, glowing with an otherworldly light. The quiet was oppressive, and the only sound that seemed to exist was the pounding of my heart, thundering in my chest. But even that, I realized, wasn't enough to drown out something else, a faint whisper, soft and insistent, creeping into my mind. Come closer. The voice was so gentle, so soothing, that for a moment, I wasn't sure whether it was real or if it was just my thoughts playing tricks on me. But it wasn't my voice. It was someone else, whispering just beneath the surface of my consciousness. I shook my head, trying to clear the haze that had begun to form around my thoughts. No. This isn't right. This isn't happening. But the pull was growing stronger, an invisible force tugging at me, urging me forward. Every muscle in my body screamed to resist, but my legs didn't listen. They moved of their own accord, taking one step after another, carrying me toward the figures in the center of the clearing. With each step, the air felt heavier, thicker. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, the earth softening, as though it were becoming part of the forest, blending in with it. I couldn't focus on anything but the pull, the voice, the presence that had enveloped me. It was like a magnetic field, drawing me closer and closer. The figures didn't move. They didn't respond to my advancing steps. But I could feel them, feel their awareness, like a pressure on my chest, tightening with every passing second. My mind began to cloud, my thoughts becoming scattered, as though the very fabric of my consciousness was unraveling. Come closer. You are meant to be here. The voice was clearer now, no longer just a whisper, but a soft, melodic hum that filled my entire being. It was almost comforting, like the kind of lullaby you hear just before drifting into sleep. It made me feel safe, but there was something wrong about that sense of comfort. I fought to maintain control over myself, to stay grounded, but the sensation of being pulled, compelled, was impossible to ignore. My feet continued their slow, deliberate advance, each step bringing me closer to the glowing figures, closer to the source of the voice. I could feel the tension in the air now, like the calm before a storm, thick and suffocating. The forest around me had become still, too still. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, nothing but the hum of the figure's presence. It was as if the very world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I glanced down, noticing that my feet were now sinking slightly into the soft earth. The ground beneath me seemed to absorb my steps, pulling at my shoes as if the forest itself were claiming me. Every inch I moved felt more laborious than the last, as if I were fighting against the weight of the entire forest to keep my body moving forward. The closer I got, the more intense the glow became, the more the figures seemed to come into focus. They weren't quite humanoid anymore. As I neared them, I realized they were shifting, slightly, imperceptibly, like shapes that existed between dimensions, blurring the lines between what was real and what was not. They weren't just figures anymore. They were ideas, concepts, not creatures from flesh and blood, but something far older, far more incomprehensible. The voice whispered again, and this time it was inside my head, echoing through my thoughts, pulling apart the threads of my mind. You belong here, with us. My body was no longer my own. It was as if my very will had been stripped away, leaving only the primal urge to move forward, to submit, to be part of whatever this was. To lose myself in the glow, in the call of the figures, in the eternal silence that surrounded us all. I reached out, my hand trembling as it extended toward one of the figures. The light surrounding them felt warm, comforting, like being wrapped in a soft blanket on a cold night. The light didn't just glow, it seemed to pulse with life, alive with an energy that whispered promises I couldn't fully understand, but I felt in my bones. "Come closer." The voice came again, no longer a whisper, but a command. I could feel it in my chest now, resonating in my ribs, filling me up from the inside out, like I was becoming part of the forest itself. Becoming part of them. The ground beneath my feet had become a soft, spongy surface, almost like moss, but there was something wrong about it. The trees around me had grown darker, their shadows longer, stretching outward like fingers reaching for me. But I didn't care. The only thing that mattered now was the green light, the figure standing before me, and the voice in my mind that spoke with such gentle authority. I took another step forward, my hand now inches away from the figure. Then, suddenly, there was a sharp crack, like a twig breaking, loud and unnatural in the stillness. My heart skipped a beat, and I jerked my head toward the source of the sound. For the briefest of moments, the glow faltered, flickering, almost like it had hesitated. And in that flicker, I thought I saw something else, a shadow, a movement, something not quite right behind the figures. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The glow steadied again, and the voice in my head spoke. "Come closer." I couldn't resist any longer. I moved forward, step by step, closer to whatever was waiting for me in the center of that cursed clearing. The forest had never felt so silent. I had been hiking through these woods for a couple of days now, and even at the deepest parts, there was always the faint sound of life, birds, insects, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But now, nothing. I hadn't realized how far I'd wandered from the main trail, lost in a fog of thoughts I couldn't untangle. My sense of direction had slipped away, and I had stopped caring. The figures, the voice, the light, they all still clung to me, wrapping themselves around my thoughts like a cold blanket, suffocating any rational thought. I knew there were other hikers nearby. I had seen their footprints earlier in the day, felt a vague sense of comfort knowing that I wasn't truly alone in this vast expanse of trees. But now, as I walked deeper into the woods, I felt the weight of isolation pressing down on me. It wasn't that I was physically alone. I could hear the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant sound of branches snapping underfoot. But I couldn't shake the feeling that, in some inexplicable way, I was utterly disconnected from everyone else. The trees seemed to grow taller, thicker. Their branches intertwined above, blocking out the sun and turning the forest into a shadowed labyrinth. The path ahead was unclear, winding off in several directions, each one obscured by the ever-thickening underbrush. I should have turned back. I should have retraced my steps to the trailhead. But there was something in me that resisted, something that made me keep moving deeper into the forest. A part of me that was afraid to leave the pull of whatever had called me here. The air around me was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, but underneath it was something else, something sour, metallic, like the remnants of a storm that had never fully passed. The ground was soft underfoot, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. It was as if the forest itself was swallowing me up, each moment pulling me further into its depths. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched. And not in the usual way, where someone might look over their shoulder or catch a glimpse of a person in the distance. This was different. This felt like the forest itself was alive and aware of me, of my every move. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, anyone, following me, but there was nothing. Only the dense thicket of trees, their bark dark and gnarled, like twisted hands reaching toward me. I pushed forward, the feeling of isolation intensifying with every step. I remembered the others, The hikers I had seen earlier, their voices echoing in my mind. Why couldn't I find them? Hadn't I passed a group just a few hours ago? The forest was vast, but surely it wasn't so large that I would lose track of them. I was sure the sound of footsteps, faint but rhythmic, had been just ahead of me, but now it was gone. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was psychological, too. It was as if the forest was closing in around me, cutting me off from the rest of the world. I tried to call out, to hear the sound of another voice, just to reassure myself that I wasn't completely alone. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice small and lost in the vastness. It barely carried through the thick air. For a moment, I thought I heard something, just a rustle of leaves, a faint crack of a twig, but when I turned, nothing was there. No sound. No movement. I felt a sharp pain and dread gnaw at my chest. I wasn't alone. I couldn't be. But the more I searched the forest around me, the more distant and unreachable everything seemed. The trees stretched on forever, endless and unyielding. The path I had been following had disappeared, swallowed up by the underbrush, and I was left with nothing but the deepening shadows and the silence. And then there was the pull. It wasn't a physical sensation at first. It was a gentle tug on my consciousness, a whisper at the edges of my mind. It reminded me of the light I had seen earlier, the figures in the clearing, how they had called me, how I had been compelled to follow. The memory of their glowing presence washed over me again, like a dream I couldn't escape. "Come closer." The voice was softer now, almost a lullaby, and it reached into me, tugging at my very thoughts. It made me feel needed. It made me feel like there was something here, something beyond the forest itself, that wanted me to be part of it. The weight of it was almost too much to bear, the pressure building behind my eyes as if something was trying to break through, to find a way into my mind. I wanted to turn around, to go back, to find the others, to escape this maddening, suffocating pull. But no matter how hard I tried, my body refused to comply. Every step forward felt more inevitable, more necessary. The deeper I went, the more I felt as though the forest was closing around me, encasing me in its shadow. I could feel my breath quicken, my pulse racing in my ears. I couldn't run. I couldn't stop myself. The isolation, the overwhelming silence, and the call from the depths of the trees were all merging into one thing. The forest was pulling me in, claiming me. I wasn't sure how long I had been walking or how much farther I had to go. Time had lost meaning, just like the other hikers. Had they ever been real? Or were they just a figment of my fading thoughts, another illusion created by this place? The pull grew stronger, relentless, until it was all I could think about. "Come closer." And this time, I obeyed. The air had changed. It wasn't just a pull anymore, the pressure in the atmosphere had thickened, turning the forest even darker, even more alive than before. The heavy silence weighed on my shoulders, stifling, suffocating, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I felt like I was walking in a dream where time no longer mattered and I was drifting farther and farther from reality. But then, I heard it. At first, it was so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. A soft whisper, barely perceptible, carried on the breeze that had begun to stir. The rustling of the trees had stopped, replaced by a thin murmur that felt like it was coming from within the wind. It was the kind of sound that couldn't be pinned down, like a voice just out of reach. But the longer I listened, the more distinct it became. "Come closer." It wasn't the same voice I had heard before. This one was different, higher pitched, a chorus of voices layered together. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound flowed through the leaves, curling around me, seeping into my mind like a drug, smooth and insistent. I stopped in my tracks, my body tense. The forest around me, which had been eerily still, suddenly felt like it was moving. The trees whispered, the branches swaying without wind, the ground shifting beneath my feet as if the earth itself had come alive. I swallowed, my throat dry, and turned slowly in a circle, trying to locate the source of the whispering. It was everywhere, every direction. But there was no one, no hikers, no creatures. Nothing but the trees, the thick underbrush, and the strange murmur that now seemed to fill the air. It's just the wind, I tried to reassure myself. Just the wind, that's all. But the more I listened, the louder the whispers grew. They weren't random sounds or the playful rustling of branches anymore. No, this was intentional, purposeful. A series of murmurs layered in rhythm, like they were trying to convey something, a message. It wasn't the natural wind. This was something else. The sound grew stronger, closer, like it was speaking directly to me, my name echoing softly within the rustling. Come closer, come closer, come closer. I closed my eyes, shaking my head violently as though that would somehow stop it, but it only intensified. The whispers became sharper, more urgent, the wind picking up pace, swirling around me. The trees that had been so still were now creaking, bending ever so slightly toward me, their limbs seemingly pointing in my direction. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't tell where the whispers ended and my own thoughts began. The voices blended together, disorienting, pulling me deeper into the forest. It felt like a promise, like they were offering something just beyond the horizon, a release, a place where I could belong. I stepped backward, trying to regain control, but every step felt heavier, as though the ground had turned into something sticky, pulling me back, urging me to stay. And the whispers, the soft, rhythmic whispers, they never stopped. They were inside my head now, not just in the wind. I turned to look behind me, desperately searching for any sign of the hikers I had thought I'd heard earlier. But there was nothing. The forest had swallowed them up. The path was gone. The trees had closed in tighter, the shadows lengthening as if the light itself was fleeing. I swallowed hard, breathing rapidly as panic began to creep in, threatening to overtake me. Why can't I get out? But there was no answer. Only the whispering. Always the whispering. And then, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. The wind stopped. The rustling ceased. The chirps of birds, the skittering of small creatures, all vanished. The stillness was oppressive, thick as if the forest itself were waiting for something, holding its breath. I couldn't tell if I had been standing there for seconds or hours. All I knew was that I had lost all sense of time, lost all sense of my own place in the world. The only thing left was the sound, the soft, melodic whispers that still surrounded me, filling the silence, making my skin crawl with an unsettling mixture of dread and fascination. I tried to move again, my feet heavy and reluctant. I couldn't stay here, not with the voices and the quiet that felt like it was closing in. But as I turned to leave, I felt it, the tugging sensation again. This time, stronger, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the path anymore. It was coming from deeper within the woods, from beyond the trees, from somewhere darker. It called to me. I tried to take a step forward, but my legs wouldn't move. The whispers picked up again, louder now, urgent, their words indistinct but pressing. My mind felt like it was unraveling, like I couldn't hold onto the threads of my own thoughts. The forest was pulling me in, deeper and deeper. The whispers were all I could hear now. And as they filled my mind, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't in control anymore. Come closer. I couldn't escape it, the pull. It was no longer just a distant sensation, something vague and intangible. It was an overpowering force, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, urging me forward. The path ahead seemed to twist and bend unnaturally, guiding me deeper into the heart of the forest. My legs moved of their own accord, as if the earth itself had a hand on my back, pushing me. But then, something caught my eye. A flicker. A shimmer of green in the distance. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. I blinked, rubbing my eyes as if to clear away some lingering fog. But when I opened them again, I saw it. There, just beyond the trees, was a figure. A humanoid shape, glowing with an eerie green light, standing motionless in the shadows. I froze. The figure didn't move at first, but I could feel its presence, as though it was watching me, waiting. The light from it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, casting strange, elongated shadows on the forest floor. The air grew colder, the very atmosphere around me shifting. I could barely breathe. It was impossible to look away. Every part of my body screamed at me to run, to turn back, but my feet remained rooted to the spot. My mind reeled. Was this real? Or was I slipping deeper into some delusional nightmare? I squinted, trying to make sense of the figure. It didn't look human. Not entirely. Its shape was fluid, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. Its body seemed to ripple, flickering in and out of existence, like a mirage. One moment, it was standing tall, its limbs elongated and graceful, and the next, it was distorted, blurred, like a smudge on a canvas. I couldn't focus on it for too long without feeling a dizzying pull on my mind, as if the figure was drawing me in, entangling me in a web of confusion. I took a step back, but it felt like my feet were sinking into the ground. The underbrush had become thick, almost viscous, as if the forest itself was trying to trap me. I wanted to look away, to find the strength to turn and run, but my gaze was fixed on the green figure, its form flickering and warping like a flame in the wind. Then, another appeared. And then another. All around me, in the distance, in the shadows just beyond my vision, more figures began to emerge. Some were close, others were far away, but all shared the same haunting green glow. They didn't speak, didn't move in any way that could be described as natural. They were silent and still, and yet I could feel them. I knew they were watching me. The sensation of being observed was overwhelming, as though their eyes were not just on me but inside me. The figures were shifting, their forms blending with the trees, flickering in and out of view. Every time I tried to look directly at one, it would vanish, only to appear somewhere else, closer, just out of my reach. Each movement, each flicker of light made my head spin. My vision blurred as my mind fought to make sense of the impossible. Was this some kind of illusion? A trick? Or were these beings real, somehow? I felt a whisper brush against my mind, a fleeting thought, a sudden surge of panic. Are they following me? I wasn't sure anymore. The figures, the green glow, the whispers, everything was merging together, growing indistinct, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. Every time I tried to focus, the forest around me seemed to bend, to shift, making it impossible to tell what was real and what was not. The trees stretched and warped, their limbs twisting like twisted fingers reaching toward me. The path beneath my feet had disappeared completely, replaced by a shifting, ever-changing maze that felt as though it was designed to keep me here, to trap me within its walls. The figures moved again. Slowly, as though testing me, drawing me in. They didn't speak, but their presence, their pull, was undeniable. I felt their influence like an invisible force pushing against me. "Come closer." The whisper was louder now, clearer, as if one of the figures was speaking directly into my ear. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure if the voice was in my mind or in the wind, but I felt it more strongly than ever. The figures, now closer, now surrounding me, began to move with purpose, shifting in the shadows, their green glow brighter and more hypnotic. They were no longer flickering in and out of existence, but moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if they were performing a silent dance, a dance that was meant for me to follow. I took a step forward, my feet unsteady. The ground seemed to tremble beneath me, like the forest itself was alive, pulsing with energy. I felt the first stirrings of something primal deep within me, a part of my mind that wanted to run, that knew I was in danger. But the figures, the pull, was too strong. My feet carried me forward, slow at first, hesitant, but then with growing certainty, like I was being guided. The air around me grew colder, the whispering louder, as though they were chanting in unison, their voices rising and falling like a hymn. I could feel their presence pressing in, surrounding me, closing in. Every flicker, every movement of the figures made my head spin, filling me with doubt. Was this really happening? Was this real? Or had the forest already begun to break me? I couldn't look away, and I couldn't turn back. The forest and the green figures had claimed me. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape my chest. Panic, raw and unrelenting, spread through my veins, sending icy tendrils of fear into every corner of my body. I tried to take a step back, away from the flickering green figures, away from whatever it was that was calling me deeper into this nightmare. But my feet didn't move. The ground felt heavy beneath me, as though the earth itself had turned to lead. My legs refused to obey, locked in place, unwilling to retreat. I forced myself to breathe, shallow gasps that made my chest feel tighter with each inhale, as if the very air was getting thinner. I tried again, more urgently this time, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My mind screamed for me to leave, to get out of this place, but I was rooted to the spot, as if the forest had reached up and wrapped invisible chains around my limbs. I looked back toward where I had come from, toward the path, the faint trail I had followed when I first entered the woods, the one that seemed so clear, so open when I began my hike. But now, the path was gone. It wasn't just hidden or obscured by the trees. No, the forest itself had closed in, like a living thing that had wrapped its arms around the space I had come from, erasing any trace of the way back. What had once been an open trail was now nothing but a mass of tangled branches and underbrush, so thick it was impossible to tell where the path had been. The trees loomed over me, their twisted, gnarled limbs stretching toward the sky in strange, unnatural angles. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and something other. There was a stillness now, a suffocating silence that weighed on me, pressing against my chest, choking off any remaining thoughts of escape. The figures were still there, surrounding me, flickering in and out of sight. They hadn't moved, but I could feel their eyes. No, not eyes, their presence, watching me, listening to me. Why won't they leave me alone? I could hear the faint, insistent whispering again, growing louder, as though the forest itself was speaking, urging me to move forward, to come closer. The green glow from the figures pulsed in time with the whispers, each flicker of their movement drawing me in, pulling me toward them with a force I couldn't escape. I took another step back, desperation flooding my senses, but the ground beneath me felt like it was pushing back. Every step I took seemed to be met with resistance, as if the forest was growing stronger, more solid, more determined to keep me here. The trees closed in even further, their bark twisting, the branches curling like hands reaching out to trap me. There was no way forward, no way back. I was stuck. My breathing was shallow, and my hands shook as I pushed against the air, the heavy atmosphere pressing on me. I tried to speak, to yell for help, but no sound came. My throat had tightened so much that even the thought of calling out felt impossible. All I could hear was the wind and those damned whispers. I need to get out of here. I turned in a circle, desperately looking for some way to break free from this nightmare. The world around me seemed to spin, the green light from the figures dancing at the edge of my vision, pulling me further into the forest's grip. I stumbled, my feet slipping in the thick underbrush, but I didn't care. I had to move. I had to escape. But as I moved, the trees seemed to shift with me, bending and growing closer, like they were rearranging themselves, closing the gaps, blocking the way I had come. It was impossible. Every turn I made only led me further into the labyrinth. The forest was closing in on me, becoming a maze that I couldn't navigate, an inescapable trap. It's just in my head. It's just in my head. I told myself over and over again, trying to push down the panic that clawed at my throat. But even as I thought it, I could feel the weight of the forest, the presence of the green figures pressing against me. I couldn't escape. I wasn't meant to escape. My mind raced, my thoughts chaotic. There was no way out. The forest had swallowed me whole, and I was nothing more than a pawn in its game. Maybe if I keep walking, I'll find something. I just need to keep going. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew. The path wasn't just lost, it was gone. The forest had erased it, had erased any possibility of leaving. I was trapped. I turned once more, my legs shaking beneath me, and saw something that sent a shiver of cold dread down my spine. The figures had moved. They were closer now, much closer. Their green light seemed brighter, more intense, as they flickered in and out of view, like shadows crossing my field of vision. And this time, they were not just standing still. Their shapes shifted, their limbs stretching, bending in ways that defied reason. One of them stepped forward. Or moved, at least. I couldn't tell exactly what was happening, but I felt the movement. My pulse quickened, my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't. Don't look at them, don't look at them. But I couldn't stop myself. The green glow was hypnotic, like a beacon drawing me toward it, like I was being pulled by invisible strings. Every flicker, every movement of their bodies felt like a command, an order I was helpless to ignore. I felt the pull, stronger than before, like the earth was shifting beneath me, like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my move. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. I couldn't tell where reality ended and madness began. The green figures, so vivid, so present, were they real? Or was I simply losing my grip on what was left of my sanity? My mind felt like it was unraveling at the edges, each thought slipping away, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. The more I stared at the figures, the more I felt their pull. Their glow, that soft, pulsing green light, seemed to pulse in my mind as well, making everything around me blur. The trees, the ground, the air, they all shifted, as if the world itself were a dream that could dissolve at any moment. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog from my head, but the moment I did, the forest seemed to change again. Was I imagining the figures moving? Or were they actually shifting? They hadn't made a sound, but I could feel them. I knew they were there. But were they? I took a shaky breath, rubbing my eyes, and suddenly the world felt heavier. The weight of the forest, the green glow, the constant whispering, it all pressed in on me like 1,000 hands squeezing my chest. I could barely think, barely keep my thoughts in order. Was this some sort of trick, a dream, a hallucination brought on by fatigue or some kind of wilderness fever? I looked around, half expecting to see a sign, a marker, anything that could tell me I wasn't completely losing my mind. But the forest was unyielding. The path was gone. The green figures lingered in the shadows, their forms shifting ever so slightly with every glance I took. They were always there, in the corner of my vision, waiting, watching. No, this can't be real. This can't be happening. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus, to try to make sense of what was happening. There had to be a logical explanation, right? Maybe I just walked too far, gotten disoriented. Maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me, making my mind create figures, shadows, shapes where there were none. But then, a voice, a whisper, almost too faint to hear, brushed through my mind. You know we're here. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't just the forest shifting. The voice, the whisper, was real. But how? Who was speaking to me? I turned around, eyes wide, but there was no one there. The figures were still standing in the shadows, their green light flickering, still. Silent. Motionless. You've been walking in circles. The voice was clearer now, sharper. The words felt like they were coming from all around me, not just from one of the figures. It was as if the very forest itself had a voice, its whispers seeping into my thoughts. I glanced over my shoulder, my head spinning. The trees were too thick. The figures were too close, flickering, their shapes becoming more distinct in the growing darkness. I could feel them around me, like they were closing in, forcing me to listen, forcing me to acknowledge them. Come closer. I stumbled back, my body reacting before my mind could even process what was happening. But no matter how much I tried to pull away, the forest wouldn't let me go. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, and the trees loomed taller, more menacing, blocking any hope of finding my way out. I shook my head violently, trying to break free of the thoughts clouding my mind. This is a dream, I told myself. This is all in my head. But even as I said it, the words sounded hollow. The more I fought it, the more I felt the grip on my thoughts tighten. The green glow was drawing me in, and the voices in my head were getting louder. I tried to focus on the world around me, to cling to something real, something solid. The wind rustled through the leaves, the only sound in this oppressive silence. But even the wind felt wrong. It carried whispers, soft and indistinct, like 1,000 voices murmuring secrets I couldn't understand. Was I still myself? I felt my mind fraying, unraveling at the edges. My memories, my thoughts, they all seemed distant, as though I were watching them from afar, detached, as if they weren't truly mine. Everything was distorted, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. Was I even in West Virginia anymore? Was this still the forest I had hiked into? Or had it become something else? The path doesn't matter. The voice was back, a soft murmur in the back of my mind, as though it were part of me now, a persistent thought, a truth I could no longer escape. The figures flickered again, and I felt the pull once more. This time, it wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a sinking feeling deep in my chest, like I was falling into a place that didn't exist. My thoughts, my sense of reality, were being swallowed whole. I couldn't trust anything. I couldn't trust myself. Is this real? I didn't know anymore. But no matter how hard I tried to think, to fight, to rationalize, I could feel myself being drawn closer to the green figures, to the whispers, to the growing darkness in the heart of the forest. Every step I took toward them, every flicker of their movement, made me doubt everything I had ever known. I was losing myself. And they were waiting. The longer I stood there, the more the world around me felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The green glow of the figures was growing brighter, almost blinding now, pulsating like a heartbeat. But it wasn't just the light that was changing. The forest itself was warping, twisting in strange, unnatural ways that made my stomach churn. It began slowly at first, just subtle shifts, barely noticeable. I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye, a fleeting glimpse of a face that was gone before I could truly focus on it. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a result of exhaustion or maybe dehydration. But then it happened again, and each time, the faces were clearer, more distinct, as if the forest itself was showing me snapshots of lives I had never seen before. A woman's face, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. A child, with wide, innocent eyes, his mouth frozen in a scream. A man with an expression so full of terror it made my skin crawl. Each one appeared only for a second, then vanished, leaving only the echoes of their faces lingering in my mind. I couldn't understand it. They weren't real. They couldn't be. But they felt real. Every time I blinked, the images seemed to grow stronger, more persistent, like they were seeping into my mind from somewhere deep in the forest. I'm just tired. I need to rest. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The air had grown thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the humidity or the heat anymore, it was as if the very atmosphere had become heavier, like I was breathing in something unnatural. I looked around, trying to focus on something solid, something that could anchor me back to reality. The trees, tall and looming, seemed to pulse with the green light now, as if they were alive, watching me. And then, just for a moment, their shapes seemed to bend, to stretch. They leaned toward me, their trunks twisting like the fingers of a hand reaching out to grasp me. I staggered back, my heart racing. No, this isn't real. But the longer I stood there, the more the world around me seemed to lose its form. The ground beneath my feet shifted, the dirt and leaves beneath me rippling like water. My vision blurred again, and the air felt thick, heavy, as though it were pressing down on me from all sides. The forest that had once seemed so peaceful and open had turned into a nightmare, alive and watching, closing in on me from all directions. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, as if the voices were no longer content with simply brushing against my thoughts. They pulled at me, tangled themselves in my mind, weaving through my thoughts, wrapping me in their unrelenting grip. You're not alone here. The voice whispered again, now unmistakably clearer in my mind. But this time, there was something else, a new layer to the voice. It wasn't just speaking to me. It knew me. It knew my every fear, every doubt. We're watching you. My legs felt weak beneath me, but I didn't dare sit down. I had to stay alert, had to keep my mind together. But as I took another step, the hallucinations grew stronger, more vivid. A shadow moved across my vision, darting through the trees. At first, it seemed like just another trick of the light, but when I looked closer, the shadow moved, slithered. It was unnaturally fast, sliding between the trees with an eerie silence. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving behind only the unsettling sensation that I had seen something that shouldn't have been there. The world around me started to ripple, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched and pulled. The ground beneath my feet seemed to twist, bending at angles, the trees stretching and contracting like something alive, breathing in rhythm with the green glow. The sky above was wrong, too dark, too saturated with that unsettling green hue. The clouds weren't clouds anymore, they were shifting, morphing into strange, indistinct shapes. The faces, those twisted, olive faces, appeared again, each one flickering in and out of existence like bad static on an old TV. A woman's face, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came. A child's eyes, wide with fear, staring at me, pleading, though I couldn't hear them. The man, his face contorted in agony, reached out for me with hands that seemed to stretch beyond what was possible, his fingers elongating as though they could grab hold of my very soul. No! I took a step back, trying to shake the visions from my mind, but they wouldn't go away. The air felt colder now, as though I had stepped into another world, one that was not meant for me. The whispers continued, wrapping tighter around my thoughts, pulling me toward the figures, toward the center of this twisted forest. The more I fought, the more the hallucinations seemed to distort, making the world bend and twist in ways I couldn't comprehend. I staggered forward, desperate to escape the grip of the enchantment that was tightening around me. But each step felt heavier than the last. The world had become a blur, a sickening whirl of shadows and light, faces and whispers, stretching, distorting, closing in. Was I losing my mind? Or had I already lost it? The line between the real and the unreal was becoming harder to see, harder to feel. The hallucinations were becoming my reality, and every step I took seemed to drag me deeper into the madness. Was this what they wanted? I wasn't sure anymore. But one thing was certain, I wasn't alone in this place. And something was waiting for me, just out of sight, just beyond the edge of my vision. The world around me felt like it was warping, spinning, and no matter how hard I tried to hold onto something, I kept slipping away, deeper into the disorienting fog of this forest. My heart pounded in my chest, but every beat felt distant, like it came from someone else. The green light, that unsettling glow, pulsed in the distance, growing stronger with each passing moment. I couldn't escape it. No matter how much I tried to make sense of the madness surrounding me, I couldn't pull myself free. The forest had closed in, and with every step I took, it felt like I was sinking deeper into it, trapped in its eerie, suffocating embrace. And then, in the midst of the confusion, a voice. Soft, gentle at first, like the wind whispering through the trees, it brushed against my mind with a kind of comfort. Stay. It wasn't like the voices before. It didn't have the same frantic, terrifying edge. This voice was calm. It felt soothing, like someone offering a soft hand to guide me through the chaos. It wasn't loud or urgent. It was subtle, but powerful, like a suggestion that I had no choice but to heed. Stay, and you will be safe. You will be at peace. I froze. I had to have heard that wrong. Peace? Safety? The only thing I felt now was fear. Wasn't I supposed to leave? Hadn't I been trying to escape? But the voice, it was so persuasive, so calming, pulling at my consciousness like a lullaby. I shook my head, trying to fight the pull, but the more I resisted, the louder the voice became, until it felt like it was coming from all directions, surrounding me. Everything you fear will disappear if you stay. All will be calm, all will be quiet. I gripped my head, my fingers pressing against my temples, trying to shut out the voice. It was all I could hear now, trying out everything else. The green light, the shifting shadows, the faces, I could barely process any of it over the voice's relentless murmurs. It was promising me peace. Why fight it? Why leave when you could be safe? I swallowed hard. The doubt crept in, slithering into my thoughts. Could it really be true? Could staying here, in the heart of this nightmare, bring me peace? It felt like my mind was being slowly chipped away, piece by piece. The forest was no longer just a physical place, it was becoming a part of me, wrapped around my very thoughts. The green light that had once been so unsettling now seemed almost inviting, as if it were offering something that had eluded me for so long. There is nothing to fear here. Only rest. The voice was soft, but insistent, each word sinking into my mind with a chilling certainty. It was offering me an escape, an end to the chaos that had spiraled out of control in my mind. The figures flickered in my vision again, but this time they didn't seem as threatening. They almost seemed welcoming. Their soft green glow felt like a promise. If you stay, you will understand. You will be safe. Just listen. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the voice was inside me now, not just in my head, but in every corner of my mind. Doubts that I hadn't even known I had were growing like vines, twisting around my thoughts. What if the forest wasn't my enemy? What if I had misjudged it? What if it could give me the peace I had been so desperately searching for? The voice promised me something I didn't know how to resist. But deep down, I still knew this couldn't be real. It wasn't real. The forest, the green figures, the glowing light, they were not a sanctuary. They were something else, something darker. But the voice was so convincing. You don't need to leave. You don't need to fight anymore. Stay. I felt my feet begin to move, a slow shuffle, drawn forward by the voice. It wasn't a choice anymore. I wasn't sure I even wanted to resist. The promise of peace, of safety, felt like a balm to my aching mind. But was it peace? Or was it a trap? Was I truly going to stay here, forever lost in this twisted forest, in the glow of the green light, listening to that voice? The world around me continued to shift, as if the forest itself was bending to the will of the voice, weaving reality into something malleable, something that was no longer real. The whispering was getting louder, more insistent, until it was the only thing I could hear, until it was the only thing that mattered. Stay. I didn't know what to do anymore. Every step I took forward felt like I was moving further away from the person I used to be, further into whatever this place had become. The ground beneath me was soft, almost dreamlike. And yet, despite everything, despite the growing fear gnawing at the back of my mind, I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. I didn't know how much longer I could fight it. Peace was so close. But at what cost? The weight of the forest pressed in on me, tighter and tighter, as though the trees themselves were pushing me towards something I couldn't see. My body moved on its own, each step slower than the last, as if I were sinking into the very earth beneath me. It wasn't the ground that was pulling me down, though, it was the voice. Stay. The word echoed in my head, soft yet heavy, like a distant murmur of something that had always been there, waiting. At first, it seemed harmless. A suggestion, a whisper in the wind. But as it repeated itself, it began to unravel something deep inside me, something I didn't even know existed. Stay, and you will be safe. I hesitated. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but the voice was so soothing, so persuasive. It wasn't angry or demanding, it was a quiet, constant presence, like a hand gently resting on my shoulder, guiding me. Stay, it urged again, its tone unchanging. All your fears will disappear. All will be calm. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the reality around me. The green light was still there, pulsing softly in the distance, but I couldn't seem to break free from the pull of the voice. It was inside me now, wrapped around my thoughts, sinking deeper with each passing second. The world around me started to blur again, the edges of the trees bending in strange, unnatural ways. Was it the voice making this happen? Or was I already losing touch with reality? Peace, it whispered, the word curling through my mind like smoke. This is what you've been searching for. Safety. Comfort. A place where you can rest. I tried to focus. No, I thought. This isn't real. I have to leave. But even as I thought it, doubt began to creep in, twisting my resolve. What if this place was offering me something I couldn't find anywhere else? What if it was the peace I had been longing for? The calm, the quiet. The silence I couldn't find in the bustling city, the rest I couldn't find in my own life. Stay. I wanted to scream, to break free of whatever force was controlling my mind, but the whisper was too powerful. It held me in its grip, pulling at me with an unrelenting force. It was so close now, so clear. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, like a weight that had settled there, and it was growing heavier by the second. Do not leave. You are safe here. The forest will protect you. You belong here. I stood frozen, the weight of the words pressing against me like a storm. The green light flickered again, and this time I didn't look away. I didn't want to. The more I stared at it, the more inviting it became. It wasn't just the light, it was the promise that came with it. The assurance that I could let go of everything that had tormented me. The pressure of the world outside could be forgotten, just like that, with one simple choice. Stay. But what would I have to give up? The question surfaced like a sudden wave in the back of my mind. What was this forest asking in return? What would it cost me to accept this peace, to accept the safety it promised? And yet, I couldn't answer it. The more I thought about it, the less the question seemed to matter. The voice drowned out my doubts, filling the space with its soothing cadence. I took another step forward, almost as if the ground had already decided for me. The pull of the voice was undeniable now. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a command, one I couldn't refuse. But as I moved, a small voice inside me screamed to stop, to turn around before it was too late. I couldn't listen. The green figures were flickering in my peripheral vision again, their forms shimmering in and out of existence. But they no longer seemed frightening. In fact, they seemed familiar. Like something I had seen before, or something I was supposed to recognize. I shook my head, struggling to keep my grip on reality. I had to be losing my mind. I had to be. This couldn't be happening. But despite everything, despite the terror clawing at my insides, I couldn't stop. The voice was now like a steady pulse, throbbing in my skull, pushing me forward. Stay. the word carried weight. It didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt inevitable, like my mind was already falling into the grip of the forest, becoming one with whatever was behind that green light. "You are not alone," the voice promised, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be. I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave anymore. What if this place could give me something I hadn't known I needed? What if peace, true peace, was waiting for me here in the heart of the forest? I looked around again, and the world seemed to close in, as though the forest itself was embracing me, offering something I couldn't turn away from. The faces, the flickering green light, the whispers, it all started to blend together into something almost beautiful. "Stay with us." The voice was insistent now, relentless. And I could no longer fight it. For a fleeting moment, everything stopped. The pull, the voice, the green light, the forest, it all froze. I felt a sudden rush of clarity, a sharpness in my mind that broke through the fog. Like a beam of light cutting through darkness. The whispers faded into the background, and I was left with nothing but the sound of my own frantic breath. I blinked hard, my chest rising and falling rapidly, trying to gather my thoughts. This wasn't right. None of this was right. The voice, the figures, the glowing light, it was all too much. Too perfect. Too easy. It was everything I had been craving, but something was wrong. Deep down, I could feel it. A sickening feeling spread through my stomach like poison. I forced myself to take a step back, to break free from the hypnotic pull that had been luring me forward. My legs felt heavy, as if the forest itself was trying to hold me in place, but I pushed against it. No, this wasn't peace, it was a trap. I looked around me, trying to focus on the reality of the situation. The trees, the clearing, the strange green figures, they were all distorted, fading in and out of clarity. My head was spinning, my thoughts unraveling again as the voice tried to draw me back in, but I fought it. I could feel the pressure, the tug, the relentless pull, but I knew now that I couldn't give in. If I did, I would lose everything. I would never be able to leave. "Stay," the voice insisted. "Stay, and you will be safe." But the calm in the voice only made the dread grow stronger. What would I be safe from? What was really waiting for me here? And why did I feel like I was already losing myself? I looked at my hands, trembling, and suddenly I was struck by the horrifying realization I didn't recognize them anymore. My fingers were pale, thin, shaking with fear, but there was something else, something unnatural about them. My skin seemed to shimmer faintly, as though the very fabric of my being was being altered, twisted. The forest was changing me. Slowly. Relentlessly. I gasped, my mind racing as I stumbled back, breaking the illusion for just a moment. The green figures flickered in and out of view again, their forms blurring like heat rising from asphalt. They weren't real, they couldn't be. But the voice felt so real. It sounded so certain, so sure that I had no choice but to obey. But I had to fight it. I had to get out of here. "What if you stay?" The voice was back, but this time it sounded different, more insistent, more desperate. There was an edge of frustration now, like it could sense my resistance. What if peace is finally within your reach? I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay here any longer, not with the growing fear gnawing at my insides. I didn't know what I was up against, but I knew this much. I couldn't trust it. The green light, the figures, the voice, it wasn't just trying to lure me in. It was changing me, bending me to its will, altering something deep inside my soul. I spun around, forcing my legs to move, my mind screaming for me to run. But no matter how fast I turned or how hard I tried, the forest was closing in. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, the trees bending as if trying to trap me in place. I couldn't get out. The forest had me. I had stepped too far into its grasp, and now there was no way back. But for that brief moment, that sharp flash of clarity, I had known the truth. And it was more terrifying than anything I had faced so far. I wasn't alone here. I had never been alone. This place, this forest, was alive. And it wasn't just trying to trap me, it was trying to become me. The air around me grew thick, heavy, pressing against my chest as though the very atmosphere had turned into lead. I tried to move, to push myself forward, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, each step slower than the last, each one harder to take. It wasn't just the weight of the forest that was holding me back, it was the figures. Their green glow had intensified, growing brighter with each passing moment, and it was as if the light was seeping into me, filling my veins with a strange, suffocating energy. My vision swam as the light enveloped me. It was no longer a gentle glow, but a pulsating, blinding force that seemed to draw from the very core of the forest. The figures, those strange, humanoid shapes, stood before me now, no longer flickering in and out of existence, but solid, their outlines sharper, their presence undeniable. The green light from them was so intense now that I could hardly look at it without feeling my eyes burn. Yet, despite the pain, I couldn't look away. It was as though I was being compelled to gaze at it, to let it consume me. The faint whispering in my mind had turned into a constant hum, like a drone that filled every corner of my thoughts, its vibrations settling deep within my bones. I tried to move. I had to move. I had to leave. But my feet felt like they were stuck in thick mud. I could barely lift them. Every muscle in my body screamed for relief, but none came. The more I struggled, the heavier I felt, as though the light itself was draining me of everything, my energy, my will, my very life force. It wasn't just a physical exhaustion. It was deeper than that. It was like something was being siphoned out of me, piece by piece, until there would be nothing left but an empty shell. The whispering voice was louder now, its tone not so soothing anymore, but insistent, almost impatient. Stay, you are so close. Let the forest take you, let it fill you. I shook my head, trying to push against the pull, but my body was betraying me. Every step I took was slower, more labored. The energy I had once had, the strength to fight back, was fading, slipping away like sand through my fingers. I could feel the light pressing into me, seeping into my skin, into my soul, and with it came an overwhelming sensation of calm. For a moment, the fear, the confusion, everything seemed to fade into the background. The light felt warm, comforting, like a blanket wrapping around me, keeping me safe from the harsh world outside. But deep inside, a small, desperate voice screamed for me to resist. This isn't you. This isn't real. But the voice wasn't my own. It wasn't my thoughts. It was the forest. It was the green figures, pushing me, pulling me, bending my mind to its will. The hum of their presence filled the air, vibrating in my chest, in my bones, and my heart beat in time with it, steady and slow, as if I were becoming one with the rhythm of the forest itself. I could no longer see the forest around me. All I saw was green light, green shadows, green figures that loomed over me like gods, watching, waiting, with a calmness that was maddening. Their faces, if you could even call them faces, were smooth and blank, but there was something in their eyes, something in their posture that made me feel like I was at their mercy. I fought harder, my breath ragged as I struggled to pull myself away from their gaze. But the green light intensified, growing hotter, brighter, more suffocating. I was being drawn into it, piece by piece, until there would be nothing left of me but a faint, flickering memory in the heart of the forest. "Come closer," the voice whispered again, now soft, coaxing, almost gentle. "Let go. Surrender to us. You will be one of us." And for the first time since I had arrived, I felt the weight of the choice. Stay or leave. But the longer I stayed, the more I became certain that leaving wasn't an option anymore. Not for me. Not for anyone who had ventured too far into this cursed forest. It felt as though time had bent and twisted into something unrecognizable, something that no longer followed the rules I once knew. Each step I took, every breath I drew, seemed to stretch and contract in a way that made it impossible to grasp the passage of time. My watch, which had once kept me grounded in the world outside, had stopped working, its hands frozen, stuck somewhere between hours, minutes, and nothing at all. Had I been walking for hours? Or had it been days? I couldn't remember. The green glow, once so vivid and distinct, now hung in the air like a dull mist, swirling around me, suffusing everything. It blurred the edges of reality, distorted the sky above, the ground beneath my feet. The trees, once tall and imposing, now seemed to stretch endlessly, their trunks melding into one another, merging with the underbrush in a way that made it impossible to tell where one ended and the next began. I could feel the forest pulling at my memory. It wasn't like I had forgotten things, it was more like the forest had taken them from me, piece by piece. The details of the world outside, my life before I came here, all seemed distant, feeling like echoes that couldn't quite reach my ears. I struggled to recall the last moment of clarity I had. What had I been doing before the green light had grown so strong? What had I seen? What had I heard? But the harder I tried to remember, the more my mind seemed to slip. The edges of my thoughts became soft, like sand slipping through my fingers. The harder I grasped at them, the more they slipped away. My memories felt like fading dreams, too far out of reach to touch. I paused, looking around me, trying to focus on something, anything, solid, something to anchor myself. But there was nothing. The forest had swallowed it all. The trees, the glowing figures, the distant whispers, all of it blurred into one endless stretch of green light, a never-ending cycle of pull and release, pressure and ease. Had I been here for an hour? A day? Or had I always been here? A deep shiver ran down my spine as the thought crossed my mind. Had I ever left? I couldn't remember. The green glow flickered again, brighter this time, casting shadows that seemed to twitch and writhe. Were they moving? Or had they always been that way? I couldn't tell. The world around me was shifting, distorting, until nothing felt real anymore. The green figures, once distant and out of reach, were now close, too close. They surrounded me, their presence suffocating, their shapes flickering in and out like something half-formed, not fully realized. I stepped backward, my heart racing, but the path behind me had disappeared. It wasn't just that I couldn't find the way I came, it was as if there had never been a path at all. The trees closed in on me, their branches bending low, trapping me in place. Am I lost? It was a simple question, but one I couldn't answer. The idea of being lost had always seemed so concrete before, something I could solve, something that could be fixed with enough effort. But now, it felt different. It felt wrong. My mind, once sharp and logical, had become clouded, uncertain. Was this still the forest I had entered, or had it transformed into something else entirely? How long have I been walking? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my thoughts, but the more I fought against it, the worse it became. I couldn't hold on to anything. Every detail slipped away, fading into the green haze that now enveloped me completely. The voices, no longer whispers, spoke clearly, their words shaping themselves into familiar phrases. They weren't just trying to lure me anymore. They were speaking of things I had forgotten, things I couldn't remember. Stay with us. You have always been with us. I closed my eyes for a moment, my head spinning. The world felt like it was unraveling, threads of reality stretching out in all directions, slipping through my fingers like water. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to find a way to fight, but the more I fought, the less I could remember about who I was, about where I had come from. Stay. Stay and let it go. The words echoed in my mind again, but this time they didn't sound so much like a suggestion. They were a command, a plea. The forest was consuming me, and I wasn't sure if I could hold on much longer. I reached out, grabbing at the nearest tree for support. The bark was cold beneath my fingers, rough and real, but as I touched it, it seemed to shift, warping under my touch. The texture, the shape, it all distorted, as if the tree itself were made of something else, something not quite solid. Stay. The green glow pulsed brighter, more urgently now. It surrounded me entirely, filling my vision with an intense, overwhelming light, and in that moment, I realized something truly terrifying. Time wasn't just distorted here. Time had no meaning. There was no before. There was no after. There was only the now. And it felt like I had been standing in this same spot, staring at this same green light, for an eternity. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I had ever left. The green light grew brighter, more all-encompassing, and with each passing moment, it felt like something was being slowly drained from me. The edges of my thoughts, once sharp and crisp, began to blur and soften. The clarity I had fought so hard to hold on to slipped away like water through my fingers, leaving me grasping at empty air. I looked around, nothing felt familiar anymore. The trees, the figures, the mist, it all seemed to twist and warp, shifting in ways I couldn't understand. It wasn't just the forest that had changed, it was me. Who was I? The question floated in my mind, but the answer didn't come. My name, it felt distant, a word that should have been familiar, yet I couldn't grasp it. It was on the tip of my tongue, teasing me, but when I tried to recall it, it slipped away, evaporating into the green glow like smoke. I blinked, a wave of dizziness crashing over me. I tried to focus on the present, to ground myself in something tangible. The trees around me were tall, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots sprawling beneath the earth like veins. But even the feel of the rough bark beneath my fingertips didn't help. My hand trembled against the cold surface, and as I traced the ridges of the tree, it felt less real. It felt like I was touching a memory of a tree, not the tree itself. What was my name? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The forest wasn't just blurring my surroundings, it was blurring me. It was taking pieces of me, one by one, and replacing them with something else. Something empty. Something hollow. I took a step forward, but my legs felt stiff, uncooperative, as though they too had forgotten their purpose. My body was changing, no, not changing, forgetting. Forgetting how to move, how to feel, how to be. The weight in my chest was unbearable, pressing against me, filling me with a sense of dread that I couldn't explain. I looked at my hands again. For the first time, they didn't feel like my own. They were unfamiliar, pale, trembling, like they belonged to someone else. The nails were chipped, the skin stretched too thin over the bones, but there was something else. Something deeper. Something missing. Who am I? The thought came again, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a void. An emptiness that swallowed everything around it. I didn't know if I had ever known my name. Had I ever had a name? The green glow pulsed again, brighter this time, as if it were aware of my confusion, aware of my panic. And then the voices, no longer whispers, but deep, melodic hums, swirled around me. They weren't just speaking anymore, they were seeping into me, filling the hollow space in my mind where my memories used to be. You are one of us. You always were. I shook my head, trying to fight back, trying to cling to something, anything real. But it was useless. Every memory I reached for turned to mist, dissipating into the air before I could hold on to it. The faces of the people I had known, who were they? The places I had been, what were they? Every detail slipped away like sand through my fingers, falling out of my mind as if it had never been there. Who am I? I reached for something solid, a memory, a name, anything to anchor me to reality, but there was nothing. It was like I had never been anything at all. Like I had no past, no future, only this moment, only the green glow, only the pull of the forest. I closed my eyes, but even the darkness behind my eyelids felt wrong. It wasn't empty. It wasn't quiet. The green glow seeped through my eyelids, wrapping itself around my thoughts, twisting them into something unrecognizable. The voices grew louder, insistent, pushing and pulling at me. You are here. You always were. You are one of us. It was as if the forest was claiming me, piece by piece, carving me into its own image, erasing everything that had come before. I was becoming part of it, becoming lost in it. It was shaping me, filling me with its ancient, consuming presence. The memory of who I had been, of what I had been, no longer mattered. It felt so far away now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. What is my name? The question echoed in my mind, but it didn't matter anymore. There was nothing left to remember. I am one of them. And just like that, the last thread of who I had been snapped. The green light consumed it completely, and I became nothing more than a whisper in the wind, a part of the forest, a shadow among the trees. The moment the last fragment of memory slipped away, the world around me began to shift, as though it were no longer tethered to the rules of reality. The trees, which had once stood tall and firm like sentinels, now seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways, their trunks curving like serpents, leaning toward me with eerie intent. The air itself grew thick, dense with something I couldn't quite name. It felt heavier, as though each breath I took was laden with an unseen weight, pressing down on me. I took a step forward, but the ground beneath me felt wrong, soft, spongy, as if the earth itself had forgotten how to support me. My boots sank slightly with each step, the surface yielding like wet clay, pulling at me as though trying to keep me here. I instinctively pulled my foot back, but the ground seemed to pull with it, tugging at my soul, urging me to stay. I staggered and looked around. The landscape that had once been a sprawling, green forest now appeared as something else entirely, something alien, something I couldn't recognize. The trees no longer stood straight, as if they had been warped by some unseen force. Their branches twisted and spiraled, reaching down to the ground in gnarled, grotesque shapes. It was like looking at a world turned upside down, where nothing made sense anymore, The green glow intensified, but now it wasn't just the light that had changed. The air shimmered, as if the very atmosphere were vibrating with a strange, unearthly energy. I could hear the forest around me shifting, not just in the physical sense, but in its very essence. It felt like the forest itself was alive, breathing, pulling and pushing at me with an intent I couldn't understand. Was I still in the same forest? The question felt absurd, but the more I looked around, the less I could be sure. The trees, once familiar, were now unrecognizable, bent in ways that defied nature. The leaves glistened unnaturally, as though they were coated in a slick, unnatural sheen. The bark of the trees appeared to writhe beneath the surface, like veins pulsing with dark energy. Even the sky above me had become a sickly, dim green, casting everything in an otherworldly light. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest as the ground beneath me seemed to ripple, like the surface of a lake disturbed by something unseen. The trees loomed closer, their twisted limbs reaching out as if to touch me, to trap me within their grasp. The air grew warmer, heavier, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The forest wasn't just around me anymore. It was in me. The ground beneath me, the trees above me, the thick, damp air, everything was pulling me in, wrapping itself around me, as if the very forest were trying to swallow me whole. Is this real? I thought, but the question no longer felt relevant. What was real? What was this place? Had it always been this way, or had it changed with me, as though my very presence had transformed it into something new? I had no answers. My mind, still hazy, struggled to hold on to logic, but it was slipping through my fingers, like trying to grasp smoke. I turned to look back the way I had come, but there was no path. There was no clear way out. The trees that had once led me into this clearing were now twisted and tangled, forming an impenetrable wall. The forest had closed in on me, and I was trapped in the heart of it. Had I ever been able to leave? The thought came to me like a sudden jolt, a flash of panic cutting through the haze of confusion. I looked around again, my eyes darting from one strange tree to the next, each one more distorted than the last. The green light pulsed, flickering and warping as if it were breathing with me, like it was feeding off my fear. It was all closing in. The forest had become something else, something dangerous, something that was no longer willing to let me go. I tried to take another step, but my legs felt heavy, reluctant. It was as if the very earth beneath me was resisting, pulling me deeper into the forest. I could feel it now, something more than just the trees, something watching me, something waiting. Was I still the same person I had been? I asked myself, but the answer, once again, was lost. The question had become meaningless, like so many others. What was I to this place? Was I just another part of it now? I looked around, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't just alone in the forest anymore. The figures, the green, flickering shapes that had once hovered at the edge of my vision, were closer now, their presence more pronounced. They stood in the shadows between the trees, their outlines shifting and pulsing with the green light. They were watching me, silent, unmoving, but I could feel their eyes, like a weight pressing against my mind. The figures did not speak, but they didn't need to. Their presence was enough to fill the silence with a growing sense of dread. I couldn't tell how many of them there were, how far they stretched, or if they were even real. But they were there, and that thought was more than enough to make my heart race. I turned away from them, my body trembling, and stumbled forward, but the ground beneath me had transformed into something even more unsettling. The trees bent further, there. Branches now intertwining like fingers grasping at the sky, and the green glow became suffocating, wrapping around me, pressing on me from all sides. It wasn't just the forest that had shifted. I had shifted with it. I wasn't sure what was real anymore, or if I was even still myself. The forest had swallowed me whole, and I was part of it now. Trapped. Lost. And the worst part? It seemed like I had always been here, that I had always been meant to be here. The air had grown thick with the heavy weight of the green glow, and the forest around me felt like it was closing in, like a trap tightening with every step I took. The figures, those strange, flickering silhouettes, hovered just beyond the edge of my vision, always present, always watching. But as I stood there, trembling, caught in the oppressive stillness of the forest, something shifted. For the first time, I felt as though I could truly see them, not just as shadows or flashes of light, but as something real, something alive. They were humanoid in shape, but their features were indistinct, like smeared paint on a canvas. They pulsed with the same sickly green light that filled the forest, their bodies flickering in and out of focus, as though they weren't quite anchored to this world. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Were they real? Or was this just another hallucination, another trick of the forest? But there was something about them, something that felt too real, too wrong to ignore. I took a tentative step toward them, my body reluctant but my curiosity driving me forward. As I moved closer, the figures began to shift, their shapes bending and warping in the air. They seemed to respond to my presence, their forms becoming clearer, more solid, like they were adjusting themselves to my gaze. And then I understood. These figures were not merely watching. They were not passive observers, lingering in the shadows. They were alive, but not in the way I had ever understood life. They were creatures of the forest, born from its ancient, twisting power, and they fed on those who wandered too close. The green light emanating from them wasn't just a glow, it was a force, a presence that tugged at my mind, twisting it, bending it to their will. The more I stared, the more I felt myself being drawn in, as if my very consciousness was being pulled toward them, bit by bit. My thoughts felt heavy, sluggish, as if they were sinking into the glow, becoming part of it. They're not just watching me, I thought, a cold realization creeping through me. They're feeding off me. They're taking my mind. I tried to pull away, to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, as if the forest itself had anchored me in place. Every time I tried to break free, the figures grew stronger, more insistent, their presence more suffocating. The light around me flared, brighter, hotter, until it felt like it was searing my skin, burning through my thoughts. The whispering began again, soft at first, like a breeze rustling through leaves. But the whispers weren't of this world. They were deeper, more insidious, as though the forest itself was speaking directly to my mind. Stay with us. You belong here. You've always belonged here. The voice was no longer a whisper, it was a command. I could feel it sinking into my bones, my muscles tensing as if I was being pulled in by invisible strings. But I fought against it. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, but the more I struggled, the harder it became. The figures began to move closer now, their flickering forms extending, tendrils of light reaching out toward me. You are lost. You are forgotten. We will remember you. We will take you. The words were not spoken, but I heard them deep in my mind. It was as if the very forest was speaking, using the figures to channel its voice directly into my consciousness. I could feel the weight of their gaze, their silent judgment, pressing against my skull. I could feel my thoughts being ripped away, piece by piece, like a slow, torturous unraveling. My memories, once clear and sharp, were fading, falling into the green abyss, never to return. My identity, my life, my name, it was all slipping through my fingers, like sand falling through a sieve. The figures were not just watchers. They were hunters. They were collectors. They existed to trap the minds of the lost, to feed on the very essence of those who wandered too deep into the forest. And I had wandered too far. Stay with us, the voice repeated, the pressure of it crushing down on me. Stay with us, and you will be safe. But safety was a lie. There was no safety here. There was only the forest and the green figures that fed on those who came too close. They didn't want peace. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted to consume me. A sharp panic shot through me. I had to escape. I had to get out. But the more I fought, the weaker I became. My mind was slipping, like a dream dissolving upon waking, and I knew I was running out of time. The green light around me surged, and I felt my body growing numb. The figures were closing in, their presence becoming unbearable. I could no longer tell where the forest ended and where I began. The boundaries were blurring, melding together, until I was no longer sure I even existed outside of the green light. The figures were everywhere now. They surrounded me, their forms pulsing and flickering like the flames of a fire that couldn't be extinguished. They weren't just taking my memories anymore. They were taking me. And for the first time, I realized the truth. There was no way out. The forest had already claimed me. I had always been part of it. The forest felt as though it were closing in on me, the air growing thicker with each passing second. The green glow that surrounded the figures pulsed in time with my heartbeat, a maddening rhythm that thrummed deep in my chest, in my skull. Every fiber of my being screamed to break free, to run, to escape. But I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something far beyond my understanding. I could feel my thoughts becoming slower, cloudier. The whispers in my mind had intensified, now filling every corner of my consciousness. They spoke in a chorus of voices, each one blending into the next, indistinguishable and overwhelming. Stay with us. You're not lost anymore. You don't have to fight anymore. You belong here. Each word was a soft, coaxing pull, like a lover's gentle touch. I felt my body sway in response, my legs no longer steady beneath me. I was losing control, losing the will to resist. The figures moved closer, their forms flickering and shifting, their green light shimmering like a mirage that beckoned me into its depths. Part of me, deep inside, fought the pull. It knew that the forest was no place for me, that the figures weren't offering salvation. They were offering something far darker, something that would consume my mind and spirit until nothing remained but an empty shell, a wandering soul trapped in a world of eternal green light. But the other part of me, the part that had been so desperately searching for peace, felt drawn to them. The pull was irresistible, the promise of safety and tranquility far too alluring to ignore. I had been searching for something for so long, something I couldn't even name, but here, in the midst of the forest, it felt like it could all finally come to an end. No more confusion. No more loneliness. No more pain. This is it. This is the answer, the whispers seemed to say. Come closer. We'll make you whole. I was trembling now, caught between two worlds, the one I knew, the world of my past, and the one the forest was offering, the world of them, the green figures that could consume me or, perhaps, transform me. A part of me knew that to stay would mean to lose everything. My memories, my identity, my life, all would be swallowed by the endless green, consumed by the forest. But another part of me felt it was inevitable. I had already lost so much, so many pieces of myself scattered across this cursed place. The idea of returning to the real world, of facing the fragments of what was left of my life, felt impossible now. What was I even going back to? But if I stay, if I embrace this place. I felt my body sway again, my legs weak, as though the decision were being made for me. The pull was so strong now, so overpowering, that I no longer trusted my own instincts. My thoughts had become fractured, pieces of my former self scattered in the haze of confusion. Do I want to go back? I whispered to myself, the words heavy in the thick, oppressive air. What's left to go back to? The forest seemed to answer. The trees groaned, the green light swirled around me, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though they knew my indecision, as though they were waiting for me to make up my mind. Stay with us. You don't have to remember. You don't have to leave. Here, you will be whole. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sounds, the figures, the light. But it was impossible. The forest had become my world. The figures were my only reality now. I had nothing left, nothing to go back to. The life I once knew was slipping away, and perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps this strange, dark forest, this strange, dark peace, was all I could hope for now. I felt my body begin to relax, my thoughts slowing, my resistance fading. I could feel myself giving in, letting go of the last of my hesitation. It would be so easy to stay. But no! The thought flashed through my mind like a bolt of lightning. A brief moment of clarity, brief, but sharp. There was still something in me that wanted to fight. Something that knew, despite everything, despite how real the forest felt, that I wasn't ready to disappear into its depths. I wasn't ready to let it take me completely. I have to leave. The decision hit me like a wave crashing against the shore, sweeping away the fog of confusion and panic that had clouded my thoughts. I forced myself to move, pushing against the green light that seemed to press down on me, suffocating me, dragging me deeper into its hold. I turned toward the forest's edge, toward whatever faint path remained, toward the world that still felt like it belonged to me, no matter how lost it seemed. But as I moved, the forest began to shift again. The trees closed in. The path that had once been so clear was now a maze of twisting, contorted trunks, roots reaching out like claws, blocking my way. The ground beneath my feet seemed to ripple, as though the very earth was shifting to keep me here. And that's when I understood leaving wasn't a choice. The forest had already decided. It was already too late. The forest was no longer a peaceful place. It was a prison, its walls closing in, its ground shifting beneath my feet. The air was thick with the green glow, the pulsing light from the figures that haunted every corner of the woods. They were waiting for me, watching, their flickering forms like shadows, but now with a malevolent purpose. I could feel the tug of the forest, the oppressive pull that sought to keep me here, to turn me into one of them, just another lost soul trapped in this never-ending green. But I refused. I had already made my decision, even if the path ahead was no longer clear. The pieces of my past, my memories, my identity were slipping further away with every step, but I had to fight. I took a breath, swallowing down the panic that threatened to rise in my chest. My legs felt like lead, heavy and uncooperative, but I pushed forward, moving through the shifting undergrowth, trying to break free from the suffocating embrace of the forest. But as I took another step, the world around me seemed to blur, and the green light intensified, as though the very forest itself was pulling me back. I stumbled, my thoughts growing dizzy, but I refused to let it take me. And then I heard it. A voice, not spoken aloud, but inside my mind, cold, insistent, and somehow ancient. You can't leave. The words rang in my skull like a warning bell. The figures, now fully visible, stepped forward from the darkness of the trees. They were no longer just flickers of light, but full, tangible forms, their humanoid shapes flickering in and out of focus. Their green glow bathed the forest in an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows that danced and swirled around us. They had come for me. I froze, caught between the green light and the pull of the figures. They circled around me, their silent movements both graceful and unsettling, their faces blank and yet full of purpose. I could feel their presence in my mind, like tendrils reaching in, pulling at my thoughts, my memories. You are ours now, one of them whispered, not aloud, but in my mind. Its voice was a smooth, soothing echo that washed over me like a lullaby. You cannot escape what is already yours. You belong to the forest. The words twisted in my head like a spider weaving a web around my consciousness. My breath hitched and I stumbled backward, desperate to break free. No! I gasped, forcing my voice out, though it felt weak, distant. I won't be yours. I won't. But they were patient. They didn't need to hurry. They had all the time in the world. And they could feel my fear, feel the weakness in my resistance. They could taste my doubt. You cannot leave, child of the forest. You are part of it now. It is too late to fight. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest as their voices pressed in on me from all sides. They were no longer individual figures. They were a singular, oppressive force, speaking as one in my mind. Each word they spoke twisted my reality, bent it into something alien, something dark and suffocating. The forest has taken you. Your past is nothing. It will fade like the memory of a dream. I could feel myself slipping, my mind swimming in a haze of confusion. The forest had become a labyrinth, the paths distorted and impossible to navigate. The green glow, so bright and cold, seemed to strip me of all sense of time. How long had I been walking? Hours? Days? Was it even real? No. I couldn't let them take me. Not like this. Not without a fight. I gritted my teeth, gathering what little strength I had left. My feet dragged through the forest, and I fought the pull of the figures, trying to force my mind to focus. I had to remember. I had to cling to something, anything, that wasn't part of this nightmare. In a desperate burst, I sprinted forward, dodging between the gnarled trees, hoping for a break, for an escape. But the forest was always one step ahead. The figures moved with me, flickering like shadows, always in my peripheral vision, always in my head. You can't escape us. The voice was louder now, ringing in my ears, rattling my skull. They weren't just figures anymore. They were voices, thoughts, feelings. The line between them and me had blurred so completely that I could no longer tell where I ended and they began. I stopped, panting, dizzy, overwhelmed by the force of their presence. My eyes were wide, staring into the depths of the green light, and I could feel myself losing the fight, losing who I was. The forest had claimed me. The figures had won. Come with us, and be free of your pain. I could hear the promise, the coaxing words like a siren's call. It felt so easy, so tempting to give in, to let go of everything that had brought me here, to forget it all, to be embraced by the forest's eternal light. But something deep inside screamed out against it. The forest wanted me to forget. It wanted me to surrender. But the remnants of my mind, the remnants of who I had been, fought back. The truth, whatever it was, still lingered somewhere within me. No, I thought, the word a tremble in my mind. I remember who I am. I won't let you take me. The figures closed in, their forms flickering, but I had made my decision. It wasn't about running anymore. It was about remembering. I had to hold on to myself. I had to fight back, no matter how weak I felt. I closed my eyes and whispered the only thing that still felt real. I will not forget. And for a brief, fleeting moment, the pressure on my mind relented. The forest paused. The green glow dimmed, and the figures flickered, as if in uncertainty. But it was too late. The forest had already claimed me. The forest was no longer just a place of trees and shadows. It had become a living thing, a monstrous, suffocating entity wrapping itself around my mind, my body. The green light pulsed in time with my heartbeat, drawing me in with each erratic beat, each exhale of air. The whispers, those relentless whispers, pressed in, growing louder, more insistent. They spoke to me, not in words, but in feelings, thoughts, images that seemed to be my own but weren't. Stay. You don't have to fight. Let it go. Let us take you. I could feel the pull, like invisible chains wrapping around my limbs, around my very soul. My legs trembled, my feet sinking into the soft, shifting earth with every step. It was as if the forest itself was trying to swallow me whole. But I refused to give in. I remember. I will not forget. I whispered the words like a prayer, trying to keep my grip on reality, even though everything around me seemed to slip through my fingers. My body felt heavy, my chest tight as though the air itself was thickening with each breath, each moment I spent in the forest's grasp. I tried to push forward, but it was like swimming through mud. The forest wasn't just holding me back, it was dragging me down. The figures were everywhere now, their green forms flickering just beyond the edge of my vision, lurking in the periphery of my mind. I could feel their presence, even when I couldn't see them directly. The closer I got to them, the more I could hear their thoughts, merging with mine, blending into my own voice, my own doubts. You can't keep running. There's nowhere to go. The ground beneath me shifted again, the familiar terrain becoming alien. Trees stretched unnaturally toward the sky, their trunks twisting into shapes that defied logic. The air hummed with an electric charge, and I could feel my senses dulling, blurring. The world itself seemed to bend, as though it were no longer bound by the rules I had once known. My legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, sweat pouring down my face as I fought to stay conscious, to stay present. The whispers grew louder, overwhelming, and I could feel them entering my mind, burrowing deep into the spaces I had tried to protect. Let it go. The past doesn't matter. You are one with the forest now. No, I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let this place erase me, make me just another lost soul, another echo in the trees. I fought with everything I had left, pushing back against the tide of their influence, clawing at the fragments of my memories that still clung to me. But the strain was too much. My body screamed in exhaustion, and my mind felt like it was unraveling, piece by piece. The green light flickered, almost in time with my racing thoughts. Everything felt warped, distorted, as though the line between reality and illusion had already begun to fray. I could hear myself breathing, heavy and ragged, but it sounded distant. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. My fingers trembled, reaching for the ground, but the earth beneath me seemed to shift and melt, the landscape itself warping, stretching in unnatural ways. You don't need to fight, child. You are part of this place. You've always been. Let go. The voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable weight, a finality. It wasn't just the forest anymore. It was them, the figures, those green creatures that had been watching me, waiting for me to surrender. Their presence was everywhere now, not just around me, but within me. They were in my thoughts, in my breath, in the very air I struggled to fill my lungs with. I could feel myself slipping. Each heartbeat seemed to slow, each breath more labored. The green light was blinding now, swirling around me like a storm, drowning me in its sickly glow. My vision blurred as the figures stepped closer, their forms flickering like phantoms in the mist. Let us show you the truth. The forest is your home now. There is nothing left for you in the world outside. My mind screamed in protest, but my body felt as if it were no longer my own. I could feel the tug, stronger now, more insistent, like a thread pulling me down into the very heart of the forest. It was as though I were being stretched thin, my soul being pulled from my body. And then, a flicker. A fleeting moment of clarity, a moment of desperate realization. No. This isn't real. This can't be real. I am not part of this place. I am not. But even as the thought formed, it felt like it was slipping away from me, a half-remembered dream that evaporated in the morning light. I reached out, desperate for anything to hold on to. The figures were closing in, their glowing green faces now inches from mine, their eyes empty, but their influence filling me completely. I couldn't think. I couldn't feel. All I could hear was their voice in my mind, urging me to let go. It's over. You are ours. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break free, but my throat was dry, my voice lost. There was nothing left but the pull, the all-consuming pull of the green light, the soft whisper of the forest that wanted me to become one with it. And for a brief, terrifying moment, I wasn't sure if I was still fighting or if I had already given in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every ounce of my being was being drawn into the forest's grip, and I felt myself slipping away, like sand through the cracks of my fingers. It was as if the forest had become my reality, every leaf, every shadow, every flicker of green light stretching out to claim me. The green figures stood in front of me, their presence overwhelming, their silence deafening. I could still hear their whispers, a chorus of soothing, disorienting words that wrapped themselves around my mind like chains. Come to us. You belong here. Let the forest consume you. No. The scream rose from somewhere deep inside me, but it didn't break free from my lips. My voice was gone, drowned in the crushing pressure of the forest. My memories, my life, were fading like fog under a rising sun, leaving nothing behind but a hollow, empty feeling. I am me, I told myself, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I remember who I am. I have to remember. But it was slipping. Slipping so fast, and I couldn't hold on anymore. The pull of the forest was too strong, its tendrils snaking into my thoughts, twisting my identity, erasing the very things that made me who I was. The green light was brighter now, a sharp, sickly glow that seemed to burn into my very soul. It made my eyes sting, my skin crawl. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it, but it didn't help. The more I struggled, the more the forest twisted, the more the figures flickered around me, their presence growing, tightening around me like a vice. They were moving, not physically, but in my mind. They were inside me, their voices echoing in every thought, every memory I tried to cling to. You cannot escape this. You are part of it now. I could feel myself breaking, my sense of self shattering into pieces. The past was becoming a distant, hazy blur. My name, my family, my life before this moment, all of it was becoming foggy, out of reach. The more I tried to grasp it, the more it dissolved, slipping through my mind like water running through my fingers. No. I thought again, though the word felt weak now, barely a whisper in my own mind. I won't let you take me. I stood, my legs shaking beneath me, but I had to keep moving. I had to fight. There was nothing left to do but run. My body felt foreign to me, slow, unresponsive, as if it had become a vessel for something else, something that wasn't me. But I fought, pushing forward despite the exhaustion, despite the burning desire to just give in. Every step felt like it might be my last. The air was thick and heavy, the world around me bending, shifting, warping. The trees no longer looked familiar. The path I had been following had vanished, replaced by an endless stretch of identical, gnarled trees that seemed to close in on me. The forest itself seemed to be moving, reacting to my every attempt to break free. Come back. You belong here. The green figures were all around me now, circling, flickering in and out of sight. Their presence pressed in on me from every angle until I could no longer tell if they were real or just a manifestation of the forest's power over me. The line between reality and illusion was blurring with every passing second. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the beat erratic, as if I were suffocating under the weight of the green light, the weight of the figure's silent demand. My thoughts scattered in 1,000 directions, desperate to cling to anything real, to anything that could pull me out of this nightmare. But it was all slipping away, swallowed by the endless green glow. No. I am not one of you. I am not like you. But the words were hollow, empty in the face of the overwhelming power of the forest. I could feel it now, the compulsion, like an invisible force pushing me toward them, toward the waiting embrace of the green figures. It was all I could do to stand, let alone move. My mind was a blur of fragmented thoughts, struggling to hold on to some shred of my former self. But it was too much. The green light. The whispers. The figures. They were all becoming one, a singular force that was swallowing me whole. I couldn't do it. I couldn't fight anymore. The forest was winning. Tears burned in my eyes, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I collapsed to my knees, the world spinning around me, my hands gripping the ground, trying to hold on to something, anything that might be real. But the forest wouldn't let me. The figures were closing in, their cold green light overwhelming everything. It was as if my own thoughts were no longer mine. Their voices filled my mind, louder now, overlapping until I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. The pull was too strong, too deep, and I felt myself being torn apart from the inside out. Come to us. It's the only way. Let go. But I couldn't. I couldn't let go. There had to be something. Some way out. Some shred of myself left to fight. But the forest had already taken everything. And I was left with nothing but the green light, the whispers, and the cold, unfeeling presence of the figures. I could feel it now. Their power wasn't just a suggestion, a whisper in my mind, it was overwhelming, absolute. It was as if they were inside me, pulling at the very core of who I was. My memories, my thoughts, everything I had ever been, began to slip away, unraveling like threads in a storm. The green figures, now standing close enough for me to almost touch, flickered with a cold, relentless light. It wasn't just their glow that disoriented me, it was them. They were inside me, in my mind, in my very blood. "Let go," they whispered in perfect unison, their voices blending with the wind, with the rustling of the leaves. "You are one of us. You have always been one of us." I tried to push them out, to fight the invasive thoughts, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. My body felt like it was no longer mine. My arms, my legs, my senses all seemed distant, as if they belonged to someone else. I couldn't move the way I wanted to. My legs were stiff, uncooperative, as though they had forgotten how to walk. My head throbbed with the weight of the forest's presence, and the green light, its sickly glow, now consumed everything. The figures didn't need to speak aloud. They didn't need to touch me. Their influence radiated an invisible pressure that pressed on my skull, on my heart, on my very soul. I felt my memories fading, like pages in a book being torn out, each detail, each name, each face dissolving into nothing. I reached for my memories, but they slipped further from my grasp. Who was I? The question barely formed in my mind before it too vanished, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. I could hear their voices again, only this time they were louder, more insistent, drowning out everything else. "This place is where you belong now. You have always been part of the forest. We've been waiting for you." I felt my heart skip a beat. No, I thought. No, this isn't real. This isn't me. I can't be, but the words trailed off as the figure's power pressed deeper, folding in on me. Every thought, every flicker of my will was being washed away by the cold tide of their influence. I no longer had control. The forest had claimed me, and there was no escape. You are part of this world now. You have always been. The force of their presence inside me was so strong now, I could feel my own identity cracking, disintegrating into the same green glow that surrounded me. The urge to let go, to sink into this alien world they offered, was growing, relentless. It promised peace. It promised belonging. It promised that the pain of resistance would end if I just gave in, if I just stopped fighting. I felt the last vestiges of who I was slipping away, like sand through an hourglass. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a feeling, a living thing, and I had been a part of it all along. The realization struck me with the force of a wave, and for a moment, I almost welcomed it. I could feel the last vestiges of my will fading, and for a heartbeat, I almost wanted to be part of this world, to give up the struggle, to let the forest take me fully. But then, something in me fought back. A distant, primal urge, something that wasn't part of the forest, something that was me, flickered in my mind like a dying ember. I fought, desperately, trying to hold on to the few fragments of myself that hadn't been swallowed by the green light. I tried to remember my name, my purpose, the reason I had come here in the first place. I am not this. I am not part of you. The figure's power twisted inside me, trying to smother the last spark of defiance. Their light, so bright and all-consuming, now pressed in on my mind, filling every thought, every moment with their promise of peace. You don't need to fight. You don't need to remember. This is where you belong. But that tiny ember, that last flicker of resistance, refused to die. It burned weakly, stubbornly. The green light grew stronger, almost painful, like it was forcing its way through me, suffocating me, erasing every inch of my identity. But I refused to let go. I couldn't. There was still something left, something that told me this wasn't the end, that I wasn't meant to become the forest. Yet, even as I held onto that sliver of resistance, I felt it slipping, like a dream that's almost forgotten upon waking. The green glow was everywhere, and my body was no longer mine to control. The figures were pulling me in, closer now, their presence merging with mine, until I wasn't sure if I was seeing them or if they were seeing me. My mind was no longer mine to command. The forest had woven itself into my very essence, and I was beginning to feel like I belonged to it, trapped, lost, part of something ancient and insidious. My thoughts were no longer my own. My memories, my name, they were all dissolving, absorbed into the green light that pulsed from the figures that seemed to come from everywhere. I felt myself fading, becoming one with the forest, with the green glow, with the voices that promised peace and endless oblivion. But even in that moment, in the heart of their power, a small part of me, the last, fragile part, refused to surrender. Even if it was too late to fight, even if it was too late to remember, I couldn't let go completely. I would fight until the very end. Even if the forest had already taken me. I was slipping. The last remnants of my identity, of the person I had been, were crumbling, as if each piece was being swept away by the green tide. The forest around me, this place, this cursed place, was no longer something I could fight. The figures, still flickering with their cold, green light, hovered around me, their silent presence pressing on me from all sides. They didn't need to speak to me anymore. Their power was in my mind, in my blood, in the very air I breathed. I could feel it now, deep within me, like a parasite, growing stronger with every passing second. "This is your home now," they whispered, their voices blending with the wind, with the rustling of leaves, like a song that had always been there, only I had never listened before. "You were always meant to be part of this. There is no need to fight. Come to us. Let go. Be at peace." The green light pulsed, softer now, almost like a lullaby, beckoning me closer. The weight of it was overwhelming, soothing in a way that made my resistance seem foolish, like a child's tantrum against something far greater. "Why fight?" the voice in my mind asked, growing stronger. "Let go of your pain. Let go of who you were. There is no need for you to be anything other than this. This is who you've always been. This is where you belong." I stood there, paralyzed. The last shred of resistance inside me wavered, a single thread about to snap. My legs felt like they were sinking into the ground, rooted, no longer able to move. The glow from the figures intensified, filling my vision, turning the world around me into a hazy blur of green. The trees, the ground, the air, they all began to melt together, fading into the same sickly hue. I could feel it. The memories that had once defined me, the hikes I'd taken, the life I had left behind, the people I'd loved, were now so distant, so far away, they might as well have never existed. What did it matter? They had no place here. They had no place in the green world that was swallowing me whole. The forest had no boundaries now. It was everywhere, in everything. The line between me and it had blurred, and I couldn't tell if I was still fighting or if I had already given in. The figures were close now. I could feel them moving around me, flickering, their presence pushing in from all directions. Their green glow was inside me, wrapping around my heart, filling my lungs, wrapping my very thoughts in a warm, suffocating embrace. It wasn't cold. It wasn't harsh. It was comforting. So comforting. The pull was too strong. The will to resist, the last bit of defiance, was weakening. What was left of my memories, my name, my life, my past, faded like the last breath of a dying dream. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing to hold on to. I belong here, I thought. The words were not mine. They were the forest's. They were the figure's words. They were the truth. I could feel the final remnants of who I was slipping away, like water flowing through my fingers. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen the sun. I couldn't remember the last time I had heard a voice that wasn't the forest's. This is peace. The figures flickered once more, and this time I did not resist. I didn't even try. The weight of their power, the overwhelming sense of belonging, filled me completely. Every step, every moment, every thought was consumed by the green light. There was no more fear, no more doubt. There was only this, the endless, unyielding embrace of the forest. I surrendered. My identity shattered like glass, and the pieces were absorbed into the vastness of the green world around me. The green figures were no longer separate from me, they were me. I was part of them. I was part of the forest. I was part of the endless green. And for the first time, I felt at peace. There was a shift. At first, I couldn't place it. I had fully surrendered. I had given in. The green glow enveloped me completely, and for a moment, I was one with the figures, one with the forest. There was no more pain, no more confusion. But as I stood there, suspended in the soft hum of their power, a quiet whisper, a strange, foreign voice, echoed in the recesses of my mind. It was not the harmonious, soothing whispers I had heard before. This voice was different. It was darker, more ancient. You don't understand, it murmured, as if speaking from a great distance, what you have become. My heart, or what was left of it, skipped a beat. I could feel the pressure inside my chest increase. The weight of the green light, which had once felt comforting, now felt heavy, as if the air itself was thickening around me, suffocating me. For the first time, I felt a ripple of unease in the back of my mind. You are part of us now, the voice said, but this time there was a coldness, a sinister edge to the words. But you do not know what we are. You do not know what it means to belong to us. The green figures flickered around me, their lights pulsating like a heartbeat. The realization, slow and creeping, began to unfurl in my mind like a dark flower blooming in the pit of my stomach. I had thought I was merely lost in the forest, entangled in its strange enchantment. But no! This was something much older. Something far more dangerous. The voice came again, louder now. We are not of this world, not in the way you think. We are not simply spirits of the forest, not mere guardians of the trees. We are hungry. Hungry? I thought, my mind scrambling to make sense of the words. I tried to push the thought away, but it lingered. The unease was growing into something far darker, something I could no longer ignore. The figures, once so gentle, now seemed to shimmer with something more, something that vibrated with an alien power, an ancient, primal force that reached beyond time itself. They were not just guardians of the forest, not protectors of nature. They were parasites. Their purpose was to feed on the souls of those who wandered too close to their domain. My body grew cold, despite the warmth of the green glow. I felt the pieces of me that had slipped away being drawn out once more, not into the peace I had once felt, but into something far darker. This is what they do, I realized with horror. They didn't just take you. They consumed you. Every memory, every shred of your essence was siphoned into the forest, swallowed whole by the green light. You are not the first, the voice continued, a low rumble of satisfaction. We have watched many wanderers, seekers, lost souls who thought they could escape their worlds. But they never escape us. You will forget everything, all the little things that made you who you were. And when you have forgotten enough, we will feast. I staggered, trying to step backward, but the forest around me shifted, closing in. The green light blurred my vision, the trees bending impossibly around me. I could no longer see where the forest ended and I began. The figures had become indistinguishable from the very air, the very earth beneath my feet. There was no escape, no place to run, no way out. You are becoming part of the forest. You will be forgotten, lost to time, and in your place, the voice paused, as though savoring its words. In your place, we will grow stronger. The truth struck me like a blow to the chest. I wasn't just a visitor. I wasn't even a lost soul anymore. I was food. I fought to stay conscious, to cling to the last shred of who I was, but it felt hopeless. My mind, once sharp and full of memories, now felt like a haze. The longer I stayed in this place, the more I felt myself slipping away. The figures had begun to devour me in ways I could not even comprehend. The forest had already begun its slow, irreversible process of erasure. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I had no voice left. No body. No identity. It's too late, the voice whispered, its satisfaction clear. You belong to the forest now. But even as I felt myself fading, the last fragments of me, my name, my purpose, clung desperately to life, fighting against the overwhelming tide. For the briefest of moments, I saw something, someone, in my mind's eye. A flicker of who I had been. I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't ready to be consumed, to disappear forever. But as the green glow intensified around me, the whispering grew louder, and the pull became unbearable. I knew it was only a matter of time before I, too, would fade into nothing. My memories, my name, would be gone, erased, taken into the forest like all those who had come before me. And then, there would be no trace left. The realization washed over me like a tide, cold and overwhelming. We never leave. The words echoed in my mind, not spoken by the figures, but whispered by something deeper, something older that existed within the heart of the forest. I could feel it now, creeping through my thoughts, shifting my perceptions. The forest wasn't just trapping me. It was claiming me, claiming all of us who wandered too close. And then I understood. I wasn't just a lost traveler, or a confused wanderer. I wasn't just a victim of the forest's strange, unearthly power. I had become one of them, just another piece in the endless cycle. The green glow was suffocating. The air was thick with it, heavy with an unnatural sense of permanence. My body felt numb, distant, as if I was slowly becoming part of the very earth beneath me. The forest's roots had already begun to twist around my mind, slowly erasing everything that had once been mine, my memories, my thoughts, even the very essence of who I was. The figures were still there, flickering in and out of existence, their silent gaze fixed upon me. They didn't speak, but their presence was so powerful, so absolute, that I could hear their voices in every corner of my mind. This is how it happens, I realized, and with that thought, a cold chill ran down my spine. This is the price of the forest's power. The ones who come here, they never leave. They weren't just guardians. They weren't just watchers. They were collectors, and the forest itself was a trap, a place where memories went to die, where souls were stripped of their past and forced to become part of the endless green. It was a cycle, repeating again and again. Those who were claimed would lose everything, every trace of their identity, and would be absorbed into the eternal enchantment of the forest, their memories forgotten, their essence consumed by the land they had once walked. And worse still, I wasn't alone. I could feel them, the others who had been lost here before me. I could feel their lingering presence in the wind, in the rustle of the leaves, in the way the light flickered in the trees. They were not gone. They were trapped, like me, their memories erased, their souls intertwined with the forest. The forest fed on them. It fed on us. My heart pounded in my chest as a realization hit me like a physical blow. The figures didn't just take memories, they replaced them. The essence of the souls they claimed wasn't simply lost to the void. It was absorbed into the forest's eternal rhythm. Their identities weren't erased, they were overwritten. They were made part of the forest, transformed into something new, something that had no need for individuality, no need for a past. I could feel the tug at the edges of my mind, the pull of their enchantment, growing stronger. They didn't want me to understand. They didn't want me to fight back. They wanted me to accept my fate, to embrace the eternal forgetting that came with becoming one of them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the green light swirled around me, seeping into my skin. "Let go," the voice said again. "Embrace the peace. There is no pain here. There is only us. Only the forest. Only the green." I could feel it then, the shifting of my thoughts, the blurring of my memories. The names of people I had loved, the places I had visited, the moments that had defined me, they were all slipping through my fingers, fading into the mist of the forest. They were becoming nothing. And what replaced them was the forest's eternal presence, its quiet, green embrace that filled every corner of my mind. But I couldn't let go, not yet. Somewhere, deep within me, I remembered who I had been. I remembered the world outside the forest. The sun, the air, the people. There was still a part of me that fought, that refused to be erased. But the longer I stayed here, the more that part of me seemed to weaken, to fade. The voices of those who had come before me, the lost souls of the forest, whispered in my mind, telling me to accept it, to become it. "You are not alone," they whispered. "We are all here, waiting for you to join us. You will never be forgotten, for you are now part of us, part of the forest's endless memory." But what was left of me? The longer I lingered in this place, the more I realized that the me I had known, the person who had come here seeking peace, seeking answers, was already slipping away. Was it worth it to keep fighting? To keep struggling against the pull of the forest, against the overwhelming power of the green light? Or was it inevitable? Was I already lost? The forest had already claimed me. It had already begun to erase me. And once it was done, there would be nothing left. Only the green, only the figures, only the endless enchantment of the forest. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision press down on me. Was I ready to join them? Or would I continue to fight, knowing that every second spent here pulled me further into their grasp? The fog in my mind thickened, but some part of me, refused to let go, refused to surrender. The figures flickered around me, their silent presence pressing against my every thought. The green glow was oppressive, but it wasn't just the light that weighed down on me. It was something far worse, the realization of what I had become. I felt a deep chill run through me, though the warmth of the green light should have kept me comfortable. It wasn't a physical cold, but an emotional one, creeping into my heart, freezing my thoughts. The voice, calm and ancient, echoed in my mind once again. You think you are the first. You think you are the only one to have come here. I stumbled, almost falling to my knees, as the weight of the voice's words sank in. Something about them was too real, too familiar. My body trembled, and I fought to hold on to the fragments of my thoughts. You are not the first, the voice continued, soft yet filled with a darkness that sent a shiver down my spine. No, you are not the first to be claimed by the green. You are only one in a long line of souls, lost and forgotten, swallowed whole by the forest. I gasped, the breath catching in my throat. For the first time, I understood, truly understood, what had been happening in this place. I wasn't just wandering through an ordinary forest. I wasn't just lost in the woods or in some mysterious, enchanted space. The green figures weren't guardians of nature. They weren't even spirits, like I had thought. No, they were predators. I could feel them around me now, their presence closing in, suffocating me. And with that suffocation, the truth bloomed in my mind, horrifying and undeniable. Every person who had ever disappeared in these woods had fallen prey to the green figures. Gone. The word echoed in my mind, reverberating with a sickening finality. They hadn't left behind anything, no footprints, no evidence of their existence. They had been swallowed by the forest, consumed, their memories erased and replaced with something that belonged only to the figures. Their identities, everything they had been, was lost forever. There were no more missing hikers. No more unanswered questions. No one would ever come searching for them because the forest had taken them and it never gave them back. A flood of terrible memories rushed back, reports I had read about people who had gone missing in this very park. Strange disappearances. People vanishing without a trace. They'd all come here, looking for something, peace, answers, adventure. And the forest had taken them. The green figures had claimed them, just as they were beginning to claim me. There would be no headlines, no search parties, no closure. It was all part of the cycle. Those who wandered too close, too deep, would never leave. They would join the figures. They would become part of the forest. The terror settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had read about these disappearances, of course. Who hadn't? But I never thought I would become one of them. I never thought I would be another face swallowed by this place, another memory lost to the green. The figures weren't just watching me anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for me to accept it, to surrender. To become like the others, empty, lost, part of the forest's endless hunger. But I couldn't. I couldn't let go. I couldn't accept that fate. I couldn't allow myself to become just another memory erased. The figures circled around me now, their green glow flashing in and out, like distant stars winking in and out of existence. Their silent forms grew larger in my vision, flickering as if they were trying to communicate something, but I couldn't understand it. They had done this to everyone. The missing hikers, the lost souls, the nameless wanderers who had thought they could escape their worlds, escape their lives, by walking into this place. They had walked in, but they never walked out. I wasn't going to be the next one. I wasn't going to disappear without a trace. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break free. I backed away from the figures, my heart racing, as my mind scrambled to find some logic in this nightmare. Could I break the enchantment? Was there something I could do? A way to make them see me, to remind them that I was human, that I had a life outside these woods? But the longer I stayed, the less I could remember, the less I could feel. My body grew sluggish, my limbs heavy. The memories of the world outside this forest felt like distant dreams, floating farther and farther away. Was I already too late? Was it already over? You are not the first, the voice whispered again, soft but unrelenting. And you will not be the last. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. But I would fight. Even if it cost me everything, even if I was swallowed whole by the green, I would fight to the very end. I was not ready to fade into nothing. The forest had become a prison, and the weight of it bore down on me with every step I took. The green glow that had once drawn me in now felt like an anchor, its pull an invisible chain wrapping tighter and tighter around my chest. But I wouldn't stay. Not now that I knew the truth. I had to escape. I had to get out. The figures flickered in and out of sight, their silent forms haunting the edges of my vision. They were always there, watching me, waiting for me to give in to their call. But their presence, no matter how oppressive, only fueled my determination to break free. The thought of becoming like the others, the lost, the forgotten, was unbearable. I forced myself to turn away from them, ignoring the whispers in my mind that promised peace, safety, and belonging if I just stopped resisting. No, I would not let them erase me. I would not become part of the forest's twisted cycle. With a steadying breath, I turned on my heel and started walking, retracing the steps I had taken when I first ventured into the heart of the forest. At first, the path seemed familiar, and I dared to believe that I was heading in the right direction. Maybe the forest would let me leave. Maybe it would release me, as it had done for others before. But as I walked, the trees seemed to close in tighter around me. The path, once so clear, now twisted and bent in strange, unnatural ways. The trunks of the trees seemed to lean in toward me, their branches reaching like fingers, grasping, pulling. The wind, once a gentle breeze, now howled, urging me deeper into the woods, drowning out my thoughts. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my breath caught in my throat. The familiar sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling of leaves, were gone. The air was too still, too heavy. The only sound I could hear was the soft drum of the green light pulsing around me, like the beat of some ancient, otherworldly heart. Was I lost again? Had I walked in circles? It felt as though the forest itself was reshaping, reshuffling, pushing me further and further from any chance of escape. The trees weren't just trees anymore. They were part of something far bigger, something far older. They bent and twisted in unnatural ways, their roots stretching out to trip me, to pull me back. I stopped. My mind raced. Where was I? How had I gotten so deep? I turned again, desperate to find the path back, but the forest seemed to mock me. Every direction I tried led me in a new, confusing spiral. The clearing where I had first seen the green figures, where I had made the terrible realization, was nowhere to be found. The panic that had been lurking at the edges of my mind began to surge. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs trembled beneath me. The forest was shifting, distorting the very world around me. It wasn't just a matter of getting lost, it was as if the forest itself didn't want me to leave. I fought the urge to scream. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't allow the forest to claim me. I had to find the way out. There had to be a way. I had been here before, after all. I had come in through the entrance. I could leave the same way. Right? I turned in the direction I thought was the path back, my feet moving faster, each step frantic, desperate. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the earth becoming softer, almost spongy, as if the forest was alive beneath me, reacting to my every movement. Every step felt like a struggle. Every breath was heavier than the last. The air thickened, as though the very forest was pushing back, refusing to let me go. I stumbled, nearly falling to the ground, but I caught myself just in time. My eyes were blurred from exhaustion, my body weak from the oppressive energy pressing in from all sides. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I had to escape. I forced myself to keep going, fighting against the growing sense of hopelessness, against the pull of the green light. The further I moved, the less sure I became of my direction. The trees no longer looked familiar. The world felt like it was shifting, turning inside out. The very ground seemed to conspire against me. Then, as if from nowhere, a shadow darted across my path. It was just a flicker, a movement at the edge of my vision. But it was enough to make me freeze. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but the shadow was gone. Had I imagined it? Had I finally lost my grip on reality? I stumbled forward, but the forest seemed to be closing in on me. The light grew brighter, more suffocating, and I felt the urge to look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I knew the figures would be there, waiting for me to give in. I couldn't let them see my fear. But when I looked ahead, I saw something worse. The trees had become faces. Strange, twisted faces that seemed to watch me, their eyes glowing green. The bark of the trees distorted, shifting into human-like expressions, blank, hollow, empty. Their mouths gaped wide, as though they were silently screaming at me to stay. No. I shook my head violently. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I was losing my mind. I forced myself to run, pushing through the thickening forest, through the shifting trees, through the eerie faces that watched me. My legs screamed in pain, my mind felt like it was unraveling, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't give in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the forest opened up. The trees receded, and ahead of me, I saw a break in the canopy. The sky. A glimpse of the world beyond. With every last bit of energy I had left, I sprinted toward it, heart pounding, breath ragged. The green light flickered behind me, but I didn't dare to look back. I reached the edge of the forest, the trees thinning out as the open space of the park stretched before me. I had made it. I was out. But as I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, something in the back of my mind whispered. The forest hadn't truly let me go. It was still there, lurking at the edges of my thoughts, waiting for me to forget, waiting for me to come back. And I knew, in the deepest part of my soul, that no matter how far I ran, no matter how far I went, I would never truly escape. I thought I had escaped. But the forest, it wasn't finished with me. The air still felt thick with a strange energy I couldn't quite shake, like the weight of something intangible pressing down on me. I stumbled through the trees, my steps slow and hesitant, my mind still reeling from the surreal horror I had just witnessed. I had thought that once I made it to the edge of the woods, I would be free. But with every step I took away from the heart of the forest, something gnawed at the back of my mind. I wasn't free. Not really. The quiet was unnerving now. Where the world had once seemed alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, now there was only silence. The forest had become an oppressive presence, even at its edges. The light, too, had changed. The sky seemed to darken, the sun hidden behind a blanket of clouds. The wind no longer felt fresh, but thick, as if carrying whispers I couldn't understand. I had walked for what seemed like hours, though time had lost its meaning when I saw it, something that shouldn't have been there. A path. It was barely visible, overgrown with vines and thorns, almost as if it had been abandoned for centuries. It wound its way into the heart of the forest, curving and twisting through the trees, but there was something oddly familiar about it. A gnawing sense of recognition flickered at the edge of my mind. For a moment, I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I had already been down this road before, hadn't I? Hadn't I just walked past it, toward the edge of the forest? I felt a surge of unease as the path seemed to call to me. Something deep inside me, something primal, urged me to turn away, to leave the forest once and for all. But another part of me, a part one couldn't silence, compelled me forward. I was already lost, wasn't I? How could I get further lost? The path was there, an answer, maybe, to the riddle I had become trapped in. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. The moment my foot touched the first worn stone of the path, the air seemed to shift. The hum of the forest, the eerie silence that had clung to me, seemed to settle, as if it had been waiting for me to find this way. The trees around me grew denser, their trunks larger, more imposing, but the path seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, drawing me in like a siren song. As I walked deeper into the forest, the green light began to flicker in the distance. The faint glow had always been there, hovering at the edges of my perception, but now it was undeniable. It pulsed in time with the beating of my heart, an insistent, rhythmic pull. It was calling me, pulling me back toward the clearing. Toward them. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the path seemed to wind on forever, coaxing me forward, closer and closer. The air grew colder, heavier, the shadows around me darker. I couldn't stop myself. I had to go. I could see it now, the clearing. The green glow was brighter than ever, swirling around the figures that stood waiting, motionless, in the center of the space. The same figures from before, their glowing outlines flickering, as though they were not entirely of this world. They stood tall, almost too tall for human beings, their bodies radiating an unnatural green light that twisted around them, casting eerie shadows on the ground. It was as if they had been waiting for me to return. I took a step forward, drawn to them as though my very body had been magnetized. The closer I got, the more the whispers returned, soft at first, but now louder, clearer. Stay with us. Join us. You will never be alone again. I could feel the pull deep in my chest, my heart racing. The figures seemed to lean toward me, their eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowing with an intensity that could pierce the very soul. Their silent presence overwhelmed me, the gravity of their being drawing me closer, closer, until there was nothing left but the glowing light and the hum of their power. I'm not here by choice, I tried to tell myself, but the words fell away in the wind. I could feel it again, the loss of myself. The forest, the figures, they wanted to take me, to erase me from the world. My mind began to fray again, just like before, as though the green light was unraveling the threads of my identity. The feeling of belonging to them, to the forest, was creeping back, taking root in my very bones. I fought it. I had to. But the path had led me here, and I was already so deep into the forest that escape seemed impossible. The figures stood still, silent and knowing. They didn't have to speak. Their presence was enough. I was close, so close, to joining them. But just as I reached out to step forward, something inside me screamed in defiance. No, I jerked back, spinning away from the figures, from the light, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned and ran, not knowing where the path would lead me, not caring anymore. I had to escape. I couldn't let them have me. Not again. The trees blurred past me, the forest a twisted nightmare as I ran deeper into the unknown, unsure of where I was heading. I had been here before. I knew it, but I couldn't remember how I had gotten here. I ran, but I couldn't escape. The forest had drawn me back, as if it knew I'd never truly leave. The path had circled, led me straight back to where I had started. The clearing. The figures stood as they always had, tall and silent, bathed in an otherworldly green glow. Their light pulsed in time with my heart, urging me closer. My legs felt like lead as I stepped forward, the fear and confusion swirling inside me, fighting against something else, a deep, undeniable pull. I didn't want to go back to them. I knew I shouldn't. The air around me felt thick with their presence, and the silence pressed down like a weight on my chest. I could feel their eyes on me, though they never moved, never blinked. They watched, waited, as if they knew this moment would come. Was this what they had been preparing me for all along? Was this the inevitable conclusion to my journey through the forest? To face them one last time and make a choice? Stay with us. The voice echoed in my mind, not a whisper this time, but a steady, soothing chant. It was almost like a lullaby, tempting me with promises of peace, of an end to the constant struggle inside me. I was tired. So tired. Tired of running. Tired of fighting. Everything about the world beyond the trees felt so far away, so distant now. It would be so easy to just let go. I paused at the edge of the clearing, caught in the middle of a war inside my own mind. The rational part of me screamed for escape, for survival, but there was a deeper part of me, something primal, that yearned for the peace they offered. The temptation was unbearable, like a drug coursing through my veins. You will never be alone again. You will find peace. The voice was different now, clearer, as if the figures were speaking directly to me. Their presence loomed over me, like an invisible hand resting on my shoulder, pushing me closer, deeper into their grasp. I felt my body sway, my thoughts growing clouded. The weight of their influence pressed in on me, dulling my senses, wrapping around my mind like a cocoon. Everything else, the forest, the path, my past, my fears, began to blur into nothingness. Was this the end? Had I been led here to be claimed by them, to join this strange, eternal existence? I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream and run, but the energy around me was too strong. The green glow seemed to suffocate me, turning everything into a haze. I had forgotten so much. My name, my purpose, my life beyond these trees. And yet, there was something inside me that refused to let go completely. Something that refused to surrender. I couldn't remember what had brought me here, what had happened before, but I knew one thing for certain: I was not like them. I was not like the others who had come here before me, lost to the forest, their minds erased and replaced with the endless cycle of the green light. This was my choice. The figures remained silent, waiting. The light flickered brighter, as if urging me to make a decision. They were not going to force me, they never did. They just waited for me to choose. Would I remain here with them, losing myself to the forest forever? Or would I fight, even if I didn't know how to break free from the grip they had on me? My body trembled, my mind pulled in both directions. Fear and desire fought within me. And then, for a moment, I felt it, a tiny spark of clarity, like a pinprick of light in the vast darkness that had consumed me. I could still make a choice. I turned and ran, without looking back. My legs carried me, fueled by some force I didn't fully understand. The forest pressed in on me, but this time I fought against it. I pushed through the undergrowth, through the trees, until I reached the edge, the boundary where the forest began to fade into the real world. And when I finally stepped into the open, breathing in the cool air of freedom, I realized that I had left something behind. A piece of myself. I had survived the forest, but I could feel it, its weight on my soul. I could never fully escape it. Not really. As I walked away, the whispers in my mind slowly faded, but the green glow lingered at the back of my thoughts, always there, reminding me of what I had almost become. I didn't know what would happen next. Would the forest let me go, or would it pull me back, the green figures waiting to claim me once more? For now, I was free. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never truly be. As I stood there, on the precipice of my decision, a strange, heavy sensation started to creep over me. The green light, the figures, everything around me seemed to distort and melt into something unrecognizable. My body was there, but my mind felt as though it was drifting, like a leaf on the wind, carried away and far beyond my reach. It was the green glow that did it, I realized. It wasn't just the forest or the figures. The light itself had power, a power that crept into every corner of my consciousness, slowly, methodically erasing the boundaries of who I was. Stay with us. The whispers were soft, too soft, but constant. The voice from the figures, distant yet intimately close, had begun to blur into the background of my thoughts, like the hum of an old, forgotten machine. They were everywhere, in every space of my mind. I tried to focus, to center myself, but the harder I tried, the further I seemed to slip away. My memories, the ones I clung to like a lifeline, began to fade. They were disintegrating, turning into strange, fragmented images that didn't make sense. My childhood home? I couldn't picture it. The names of people I once loved? Faint shadows. The places I'd been? Mere outlines, their details becoming obscure, like a photograph that had been left out in the rain. You are one with us now. There is no need to remember. The green light flickered and pulsed, the figure's silent presence pushing me further into this strange state of confusion. It felt almost like being submerged in a dream, where things were just out of reach but so clearly close at the same time. I could feel my grip on reality slipping, and with each step I took toward the clearing, I felt something inside me weaken. Was I forgetting myself? My own name slipped away like water through my fingers. I couldn't hold on to it. Who was I? What had I been before this place, before the whispers, before the figures? I knew there was something important I was losing, something that mattered. I should have cared. But the further I stood in their presence, the less I felt like I was capable of caring. The figures didn't move. They didn't have to. Their presence was everything. I could feel them pulling at me, reaching into the very depths of my soul, pulling out pieces of me, one by one, like a thief stealing away in the night. I could hear them calling, urging me, coaxing me toward the final decision, the final surrender. You are one with the forest now. You belong here. Let go. It was as though every thought I had was being slowly erased, rewritten, replaced. The memories, the emotions, everything was blurring, fading into the green glow. Who was I to resist? What could I do against this force, this overwhelming weight of belonging? A part of me screamed, a desperate cry from some distant corner of my mind, but it felt so faint now, so far removed. The green light felt comforting now, like the embrace of a long-lost friend. It promised an end to the confusion, to the fear. The pull was undeniable. I had no reason to resist anymore. My fragmented memories, my fading sense of self, they didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Come to us. Join us. I could feel the pull becoming stronger, like gravity itself. My legs moved of their own accord, as if my body was already preparing for what my mind was struggling to accept. I was being drawn toward the figures, toward the glowing light, like a moth to a flame, knowing that once I stepped into it, once I crossed that threshold, I would be lost forever. But I was so tired. You are safe here. There is nothing to fear. And just like that, the last remnants of my self-preservation broke away. I took a step forward. The world around me seemed to grow dimmer as the green glow from the figures intensified. The trees, once familiar, now bent at impossible angles, like twisted hands reaching for me. My thoughts, what little of them remained, fluttered like moths, too fragile to hold on to. I tried to cling to something. Anything. My past. My life before this place. But it felt like trying to grasp at mist. The harder I tried, the more it slipped away, like water through my fingers, and I began to panic. Where had I come from? Who had I been? I looked at the figures, their glowing forms casting eerie shadows on the ground. They didn't move, but I felt their presence growing more powerful, more suffocating. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were pulling at me, tugging on my very essence, stripping away everything that made me me. Let it go. You do not need to remember. The voice echoed in my mind again, calm and unwavering, like a lullaby. The sound wrapped around my thoughts, tightening with each passing moment, drowning out any resistance. I gasped, clutching my head. My memories were unraveling, faster now. I could almost see them in front of me, like pages torn from a book, fluttering in the wind, never to be read again. My name. It felt like a word I'd heard once, long ago, but now it was just a sound, a hollow syllable that meant nothing. Who had I been? I tried to picture my face, but it was like staring into a mirror that cracked into 1,000 pieces, each fragment reflecting a different version of me, none of them clear. I reached for the fleeting shadows of my past, but they evaporated before I could grasp them. Faces, places, memories, gone. What did I care for them? They were fragments, pieces of a life I no longer needed. I tried to fight it. I tried to remember. But every time I tried, the green glow seemed to pulse, rippling through me, draining the strength from my thoughts. My legs felt heavier, as though they too were becoming part of the earth, sinking deeper into the soil. The forest had no end. The trees stretched on endlessly, the ground beneath me soft and shifting. I was lost, and I could feel myself slipping further into the forest's embrace. It felt right, somehow. Why had I ever fought it? Why had I resisted the peace they offered? The voice returned, soothing, patient. You are free now. You are one with us. You do not need to remember. I felt the last of my identity crack and crumble. There was no need to fight anymore. No need to hold on to who I was, to what I had been. You belong to the forest now. The whisper was so warm, so inviting. The green figures stood before me, their light now encompassing me entirely. It wasn't cold. It wasn't frightening. It was home. I took another step forward, my mind clearing, the last remnants of my past fading into nothingness. I was no longer anyone, no longer a person, just another part of the forest's eternal enchantment. I was at peace. I stood at the edge of everything I had known, teetering between two worlds, the world of the forest and the last faint remnants of my own existence. The green figures were all around me now, their glowing forms more solid, more real, more impossible to resist. The light pulsed with a strange warmth, and for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt like comfort, like belonging. They were offering me something I could never have again, the peace of surrender. Come to us. You need not remember. You will be free here. The words slithered into my mind, soft and persuasive, like a promise I couldn't quite turn away from. Everything around me was so quiet now, except for the whispering wind and the gentle hum of the green light. It was all-consuming. I could feel myself dissolving. My thoughts, my memories, they were becoming abstract shapes, slipping through my fingers like sand. The name I once called myself, the life I once led, felt like a far-off echo now, so distant that I could no longer grasp it. My life before this forest, it had no weight anymore. Why fight it? The voice in my head asked, its tone soothing, coaxing. Why hold on to something so fleeting? You are nothing without us. Here, you are eternal. I felt the ground beneath my feet soften, shifting into something else. The trees around me loomed closer, their twisted branches weaving together to form a canopy of green, a world I was quickly becoming part of. It was a tempting thought, this surrender. To give in, to become one with the forest, to forget who I had been and simply be a part of something much larger, much older than myself. But then, a flicker of clarity. A single, desperate thought broke through the fog. Who am I? In that instant, everything stopped. The whispers faded, the green light dimmed slightly, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. My mind, a blur of fractured memories and confused thoughts, fought to reconnect with the last shred of who I was. Who am I? I gripped the edges of my consciousness like a lifeline. I remembered pieces, fleeting fragments, the sound of my name spoken by someone I loved, the scent of rain on the pavement back home, the faces of people I knew. I didn't want to lose that. I couldn't. The forest was not my home. The figures were not my family. I was me, and I wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. I could feel the pull again, stronger this time. It was relentless. The figures were moving now, shifting in and out of my vision, their silent call louder than ever. I could feel their influence crawling beneath my skin, like the soft scrape of claws, insistent, begging me to yield. But my memories, they mattered. The people I had known. The world I had left behind. My life wasn't just a series of moments to be discarded like an old, worn-out coat. It was mine. It was real. My mind screamed against the pull, against the enchantment that threatened to overtake me. My thoughts, raw and frantic, felt like the last threads of my identity, and I clung to them with everything I had. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let the forest erase me completely. Not like the others. With the strength I hadn't known I had left, I took a step backward. I turned away from the figures. The green light pulsed violently, like a wave crashing against the shore, trying to pull me back, but I resisted, digging my feet into the earth. The air grew heavier, thicker, and I felt the weight of the forest pressing against me, but I pushed forward. I needed to leave. I turned my back on the glowing figures, my heart pounding in my chest, and I ran. The forest fought me every step of the way, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The whispers had become distant, their pull growing fainter with every step I took. The further I went, the more I felt myself coming back, my thoughts sharpening, my memories returning. I didn't know where I was going or how far I had to run, but I knew one thing: I was still me. And I wasn't about to let the forest take that away. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.